John, chapter 14, verse 18. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Brothers and sisters, some of you walked in tonight with that sentence under your breath. I have no real friends. I'm left out. You felt it at lunch when the chairs scraped closer, but not for you. You felt it when the group chat went bright without you, when the laughter came in photos that your name never entered. You are the one who cleans up the confetti after everyone else has gone home, the one who scrolls past celebrations you were never invited to, the one who wonders if you are somehow unlovable. Hear the voice of Jesus over the noise. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Loneliness can sound like thunder, but it usually falls like a steady rain. It's the quiet flood that soaks the corners of a life until the floorboards warp. It convinces you to make your world small, to keep the curtains closed, to answer, I'm fine, because you're afraid of hearing your own need out loud. But Jesus walks into rooms we have locked from the inside. He speaks into the echo. He says, friend. He says, come with me. Luke, chapter 15, verses 4 through 7. He tells of a shepherd who leaves 99 to find the one. And when he finds it, he does not scold it. He does not ask the sheep to explain itself. He lifts it, puts it on his shoulders, and rejoices. Listen to that word in your loneliness. Rejoices. Not tolerates, not shrugs, rejoices. The heart of Jesus is not indifferent to the left out. He turns the universe into a search party. Rejoice with me, he says, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Brothers and sisters, there is a sentence buried in the gospel that can remake a life. Jesus is a friend of sinners. That means the friend of sinners calls you friend before your circle does. John, chapter 15, verse 15. I have called you friends. The King says it. The Savior signs it. The one who knows everything about you, what you hide, what you regret, chooses you, not because of how impressive your feed is, not because your jokes land, not because you earned a seat. He calls you friend because grace goes first, but grace also goes further. Some of us are lonely, not only because others left us out, but because we closed the door from the inside, because betrayal taught us to bolt it, because envy taught us to measure ourselves against a ruler that keeps moving. The cross speaks to both sides. It tells the rejected, you are chosen. It tells the guarded, you can open. Come to me, Jesus says. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. All who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Rest from pretending. Rest from proving. Rest from performing for a seat at tables that collapse in the wind. Hear me. The gospel is not the promise that you'll suddenly be popular. It is the promise of presence. I am with you, always, says Jesus. Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. Presence in the kitchen as you make a single plate. Presence in the pew when your hands tremble. Presence in the bus stop rain and the midnight room. When the risen Lord entered a locked room, John tells us, he said, peace be with you. That was not a slogan. It was air for lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. Loneliness has a grammar, and so does heaven. Loneliness says, what's wrong with me? Heaven says, you're mine. Loneliness says, they forgot me. Heaven says, I came for you. Loneliness says, I am not worth the call. Heaven says, I call you by name. Anchor this to your heart. You are not friendless. You are befriended by the faithful one. You are not invisible. You are seen by the God who counts hairs and tears. You are not outside. The cross is the door. Yet the gospel never stops at comfort. It leads us into courage. Grace takes you by the hand and walks you toward people, toward neighbors, enemies, the hard to love, and the hard to reach. If you have said, "I have no real friends," the Holy Spirit will gently ask, will you become the friend you wish you had? Not with flattery, not with desperate clinging, but with the steady love that Jesus shows you. The kingdom grows like a mustard seed, small, ordinary acts that become shade for many. A text at midnight that says, "Are you okay?" A soup on a doorstep. A seat saved on the pew. A promise kept. You do not need 1,000 friends to be whole. You need to belong to Christ and to love the person he puts in front of you. To those who have been betrayed, who confided and were mocked, who gave and were used, Jesus does not trivialize your wound. He shows his. He invites you to forgiveness, not as a denial of pain, but as a refusal to let bitterness become your only friend. Father, forgive them, he prayed from the cross. If you cannot yet pray those words, pray the first word, Father. Let him teach you the rest. Forgiveness does not mean returning to harm. It means releasing the hook from your own heart so you can breathe again. To those who have withdrawn into digital shadows, refreshing feeds, chasing pings, mistaking quantity for connection, hear the wisdom of Jesus about tables and houses and roads. He ate with people. He walked with them. He stopped when they cried out from the roadside. The Good Samaritan did not send thoughts and prayers. He crossed the street and paid the bill. The two builders both heard the same words. Only one put them into practice. Build a life on rock by practicing love in the flesh. Eye contact, listening ears, presence that lingers. If your courage is small, begin small. Invite one person to coffee. Say yes to one circle. Sit down at one table and keep sitting until names become stories. And to the proud, because loneliness can wear pride like armor, Jesus calls you down from your self-made towers. Are you too important to be interrupted? Too sophisticated to volunteer? Too guarded to confess? The doorway into friendship is low on purpose, so we remember to bow. Humility is the hinge on which fellowship swings. When you wash feet, you discover faces. When you serve, you discover names. When you admit, "I am not okay," you discover that others have been waiting to say it too. Hear another word from Jesus for the frightened heart. John, chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not the fragile peace of pleasing everyone. Not the counterfeit peace of staying numb. His peace, the kind that walks through storms and says, "Be still." The kind that sits beside the isolated and says, "I'm not going anywhere." So what do we do tonight? First, receive. Before you attempt to fix your circle, receive the friend who stands at the door and knocks. If you open even a crack, he fills the room. Whisper the prayer that is always answered. Jesus, come. Ask for the Spirit to pour the love of God into your heart until it spills. Second, repent. Repent of the cynicism that mocks tenderness. Repent of the envy that scrolls and seethes. Repent of the contempt that keeps score. Repent of the small vows you made. I'll never need anyone again. Because those vows have turned into prison bars. Break them in Jesus' name. The truth sets you free. Third, risk. Risk the awkward hello. Risk the text that might be ignored. Risk asking for prayer. Risk joining the small group. Risk saying, "Can I sit with you?" The church is not a club for the already connected. It is a home being built by the one who calls outsiders in. If someone overlooks you, remember. The Lord of the feast sent servants into the streets and alleys because he insists on a full house. Fourth, serve. Become someone's answered prayer. The widow, the single dad, the international student, the elderly neighbor, the kid with silent lunches. Someone is waiting for the knock you are afraid to make. Love your enemies, Jesus said. Start, at least, with the unknown and the different. If you want friends like Christ, love like Christ. And finally, anchor your nights in prayer. When loneliness prowls at 2 a.m., open the Psalms. Read them out loud. Keep the light on if you must. Ask, Jesus says, Luke chapter 11, verse 9, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. Knock until your knuckles learn hope. Seek until seeking becomes meeting. Ask until asking becomes worship. Brothers and sisters, you may feel left out, but in Jesus you are brought in, into the triune life of Father, Son, and Spirit, into a family that spans centuries and nations, into a purpose that requires your hands and your story. You are not a leftover from someone else's party. You are the joy set before Him. The cross is the open circle. The empty tomb is the open door. Step through. If tonight you need to say yes to the friend who does not fail, say it now. If you need to forgive, begin now. If you need to try again with people, choose one step now. Lift your hands, or bow your head, or simply breathe His name, Jesus. He will not leave you as an orphan. He has come. He is here. Brothers and sisters, if this word found you on the road tonight, help us carry it a little farther. Please like and subscribe, and share it with the one who feels left out. Let's set one more spare chair at the table. In Jesus' name. Preach is over. I have a story to tell you. Wind chased scraps of newspaper down the narrow street where Lena walked alone, collar up, headphones in without music. The city was 1,000 conversations she could hear only the edges of. Laughter flaring at restaurant windows. A cheer from a bar as a game turned. A baby crying somewhere above a convenience store. Her phone lit up with photos from the group she used to be in. A rooftop dinner, sparklers, someone tagged who wasn't her. She swiped the screen off and watched her own reflection return, a faint ghost in the black glass. The church stood halfway down Mercy Street like a sentence someone had started and never finished. Brick patched with newer brick, a wooden door worn smooth by hands, a faded banner that read, Sunday 5 p.m. You are not alone. She had passed it a dozen times. This time she stopped. Inside, the sanctuary smelled like old hymnals and coffee, like dust warmed by late light. A few clusters of people spoke in low voices, the kind of talking that sounds like mending. Lena slid into the last pew, near the aisle, in case she changed her mind. On the platform, a man in his 40s adjusted a microphone stand. He wore no robe, just a plain shirt and a tie that looked borrowed. When he smiled, it was not toward the room in general, but toward specific faces he seemed to know by heart. Brothers and sisters, he began, voice steady as rain on a roof. John, chapter 14, verse 18. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. The words took up the room without shouting, like someone opening a window. Lena did not believe promises. Not anymore. Promises had come with expiration dates that other people kept secret. She folded her arms and watched the preacher. Pastor Daniel, someone whispered, walk the aisle as he spoke about loneliness and the shepherd who searches. He talked about people who leave chairs open at their table. He talked about learning to ask for help without apology. He did not talk about platforms. He talked about porches. When the music began, faint and unsure, Lena stared at the bulletin in her hands until the letters blurred. On the back was a small square announcing Wednesday table, potluck and prayer, 7 p.m., all welcome. All welcome meant everyone but her. In her experience, all welcome was a sentiment. Belonging was a practice no one had time to teach. She waited until the benediction, and then until most of the room had thinned. At the door, Pastor Daniel stood with a woman whose gray curls framed a face like weathered maple. They greeted each person as if the line were one person, their eyes refusing to slide past anyone. Lena angled for the exit. The gray-haired woman caught her with a smile that did not ask for anything. "First time?" she said. "Just leaving," Lena answered. "That counts," the woman said. "I'm Ruth." "Lena. Lena," Ruth repeated, as if tasting the syllables. "You from the neighborhood?" "Across the river." "Long walk," Ruth said. "If you ever need a shorter one, there's coffee in the basement after service. I make it too strong by mistake." She patted her own forearm, a soft laugh. "No pressure?" Pastor Daniel glanced over. "Good to meet you, Lena," he said, and it was not the line people say while already turning to the next hand. "If you ever need someone to pray with, I sit on the front steps most afternoons. People think I'm waiting for a ride. I'm not." He lifted one shoulder. "I'm just waiting." She nodded because it seemed required. Outside, the evening had cooled. A bus roared past. She walked home through streets that looked like the underside of a stage after actors have left. From her window, she could see the church's roofline, a dark tooth against the pale sky. She thought of the way the preacher had said brothers and sisters without theatrics, as if the words were heavy enough to hold themselves up. Wednesday came like a dare. Lena opened the fridge, stared at a jar of pickles and half an onion, then closed it. She almost texted an old friend, typed and erased, typed and erased. At 6:30, she put on her coat and carried a store-bought pound cake with the plastic dome still taped shut. The sky threatened rain. She walked anyway. In the basement, folding tables made an imperfect rectangle. Someone had taped paper signs to crock pots. Mild, medium, mercy. And a boy of 6 was trying to balance 3 dinner rolls on his head, while his mother pretended not to notice. Ruth waved her over with a hand that held a spoon. "You made it," she said, as if they'd agreed to this all along. "Put your cake there. Tell me a story about your day long enough for me to stir this without burning it." "I work at the hospital," Lena said, surprising herself. "Insurance desk. Tell people we can't cover what they thought we could." Ruth's face shifted with compassion, not pity. "That's a hard kind of talking," she said. "Good to have you here where we don't bill for second helpings." She set a bowl in Lena's hands. "Walk with me. If you stand still in a church basement, someone will recruit you or hug you, and it's best to choose which one." They made 2 slow laps around the tables while plates filled and chatter rose. Pastor Daniel tapped a glass. "Before we eat," he said, "Luke, chapter 15. He smiled toward the boy with the dinner rolls. "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." He paused. "If you came tonight feeling lost, you can eat first." "That's not theology. That's logistics." Lena almost smiled. She took a plate and sat at the edge of a table. A woman with ink-stained fingers introduced herself as Mira, a teacher. A man named Jay talked about learning to cook after the divorce. A nurse in scrubs said he could only stay 20 minutes because the night shift waits for no one. They asked her one question at a time, and when she answered, no one took her words and spun their own stories over them. She felt something unclench, the way a hand relaxes after gripping a railing too long. After dinner, a small circle formed near the coffee urns. Pastor Daniel sat cross-legged on the tile like a camp counselor. "We do two things on Wednesdays," he said. "We thank God, and we ask Him. Anyone want to start?" "I'm grateful for my kids' laugh," said the nurse, checking his watch. "It sounds like a car starting in winter, but it starts." "I'm grateful I didn't cry at work today," Mira said, then laughed and cried a little anyway. Lena heard her own voice say, "I'm grateful the cake didn't fall over on the bus." The circle chuckled like a gentle tide. She felt ridiculous and safe at once. When it was time to ask, silence gathered, and then Ruth spoke for a neighbor with chemotherapy. Jay for patience with paperwork. A college student for a roommate who drank too much. Pastor Daniel looked up. "Anything you want us to carry with you, Lena?" She shook her head, then nodded, then said it quickly before she could be embarrassed. "I don't have anyone I would call in a crisis," she said. "I want that to change." Pastor Daniel bowed his head as if she had placed a treasure on the floor. "All right," he said softly. "Jesus, you promised. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. We ask you to keep that promise in Lena's life in a way she can taste and touch. Give her friends who tell the truth and stay for the hard parts. And make her that kind of friend too." The circle said amen, each voice different, none of them professional. Later, as Lena rinsed plates with Ruth, the older woman bumped her shoulder lightly. "You know," Ruth said, "I have a doctor's appointment on Fridays, and the bus is early and grumpy. If you ever want a short walk with company, I could meet you at the corner." Lena pictured her quiet apartment, the long trap of Saturdays, the sunlight that never sat still. "Okay," she said. "Friday." That night, she lay awake and did not mind. The city made its soft machinery sounds. Somewhere a siren threaded the edges of a dream. She thought of a door worn smooth by hands. She thought of a sentence finished. In the morning, the group chat pinged with a photo from yet another rooftop she had never climbed. She muted it and, with a cautious joy, opened a new message thread at the top of her screen. She typed, "Coffee before the appointment?" and waited. The 3 dots came quick. "Yes," came the reply. "I'll bring the umbrella we share now." They met beneath the bus shelter, where the plexiglass was etched with hearts and initials. Ruth's umbrella leaned against her leg like an old companion. Morning traffic hummed past. The bakery on the corner exhaled warm air that smelled like butter and refuge. "You drink coffee like hope or like medicine?" Ruth asked as they fell into step. "Depends on the day," Lena said. "Today, I recommend hope." Ruth tilted the umbrella over both of them, though the rain was barely a mist. "My doctor tells me I'm an excellent patient. I tell him I have decades of practice at receiving what I can't control." At the corner, a man with a cardboard sign lifted it without looking up. Ruth stopped, dug in her pocket, and pressed a granola bar into his hand. "What's your name again?" she asked. "Eddie," he said, surprised that someone remembered. "Ruth," she said, as if they were meeting for the first time instead of every Friday. "This is my friend Lena." "Friend?" The word landed softly, as if drawn down by gravity. Eddie nodded. "Nice to meet you," he said in a voice roughened by weather. After the appointment, a quick visit, a prescription renewed, they sat on the clinic steps with paper cups. A mother hurried by with a stroller. A security guard laughed at something on his phone. A sparrow inspected the crumbs at their feet. Ruth's hands cradled her cup like a small stove. "Did you always have people?" Lena asked, then regretted the clumsy shape of the question. "I had a husband who told jokes mostly to amuse himself," Ruth said, smiling into the steam. Then I did not have him. I had a son in another state who loves me but cannot fold me into his weekends. Then I had church. They didn't fix anything. They just kept showing up. Jesus first, them second. The order matters. Lena traced a drop of coffee down the side of her cup with her thumbnail until it disappeared into the lid seam. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she still knew by heart. Rooftop tonight. 8. You in? No apology for months of silence. No hey stranger. Just the familiar shorthand of convenience. She typed maybe and did not send it. Ruth checked the time. You don't have to tell me your story, she said. But if you ever want an old woman to hold a corner of it while you rest, I have strong fingers. Lena laughed despite herself. I'll keep that in mind. Back at the hospital, the afternoon turned into a hallway of faces, arriving with worries that required codes and signatures. A man argued about a bill until his voice frayed. A grandmother handed over a stack of envelopes tied with a rubber band. In the waiting room, a teenage girl cried quietly into her hoodie sleeve while pretending to sleep. Lena printed forms and explained deductibles and watched her own tone. She remembered Pastor Daniel's line about practicing love in the flesh. I can't change the policy, she told the man, but I can call and sit with you on hold. It can be less terrible together. He stared at her as if she were speaking a language he wanted to understand. At 6, her shift ended. She stood on the sidewalk with the city rolling past and the old text still unsent. The sky was a coin turning from silver to copper. She pictured the rooftop, the poor acoustics of laughter, the way compliments sound like coupons. She pictured the church basement, crock pots, mismatched mugs, stories set down without fanfare. She put her phone in her pocket and walked toward Mercy Street. That Sunday, the sanctuary filled while rain threaded every window. Pastor Daniel stepped up with a Bible that looked as if it had been rained on, too many times to count. Brothers and sisters, he said, and the room answered with a hush. Mark, chapter 2, verse 5. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, Son, your sins are forgiven. I always loved that detail. He saw their faith. The friends. The roof openers. Some of us came carrying only our own weight today. Some of us came because someone else insisted on carrying a corner of the mat. Both kinds get forgiven. He paced the aisle, hands loose at his sides. We want friends who can read minds. Jesus gives us friends who can carry mats. We want friends who never inconvenience us. Jesus gives us friends with hammers for roofs. The question is not only, do I have those friends? It's, am I becoming one? He looked at the back row as if he knew who sat there. If you've been left out, lean in. If you've been invisible, see. If your trust is broken, don't pretend it isn't, but bring the pieces and let someone carry a corner with you. During the final song, Lena found herself at the front steps where Pastor Daniel had said he waited. He wasn't there. A teenager sat instead, picking at a guitar with shy patience. He said I could practice out here, the boy mumbled. I only know 3 chords. 3 is enough for most things, Lena said. The boy grinned, surprised at being spoken to, and resumed his careful strumming. She took the long way home. By the bridge, wind lifted the river into the air. Her phone vibrated. Rooftop tonight again. A photo of sparklers. A caption that pretended the guest list was infinite. She typed can't. Maybe another time and sent it. The relief surprised her. It wasn't defiance. It was a small aligning, a bone set right. Wednesday table became a rhythm. She learned that Jay told stories better when his hands were making something. that Mira brought extra pens because everyone stole them without meaning to, that the nurse's son did indeed laugh like a car in winter. She learned to stack chairs without trapping her fingers. She learned the names of 3 widows who sat together, and the name of the college student's drunk roommate, though she never met him. One night, when rain hammered the basement windows so hard the room had to shout to be heard, Pastor Daniel held up his hands. "Let's go upstairs," he said. "The roof will either hold or it won't, and I want to hear the rain forgive the city." In the sanctuary, the ceiling boomed like a drumhead. He raised his voice over it. John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." If the roof goes, we'll be wet, but we'll still have peace. If it holds, let the sound remind you that you were never meant to weather storms alone. Afterward, as people tugged on damp coats, a woman Lena had seen but never spoken to approached with hesitant urgency. "I heard you work at the hospital," she said. "My brother's there. He keeps saying he doesn't want visitors, but he looks at the door like it owes him something." "What room?" Lena asked. The woman told her. "I'm on mornings this week," Lena said. "I can stop after." The next day, Lena stood at the threshold of a room where a television scrolled silently through a news channel. The man in the bed stared at the window like it might become a portal if he kept still enough. "I'm a friend of your sister," she said. "She said you might want company even if you didn't want to want it." He huffed a laugh that sounded like a cough. "That accurate." "I brought contraband," she said, producing a small, terrible cup of cafeteria pudding. "No one should eat this alone." They didn't talk about the big things. They talked about the rain and the nurse who hummed old songs and the ridiculous word deductible. When she rose to go, he looked at her with a frankness that was not invasive. "Thanks," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "Ruth says we owe each other walks in the rain," Lena said, and felt the truth in it. The weeks arranged themselves into a chain of small obediences. She missed a Wednesday when a migraine laid her flat. Mira left a Tupperware of soup at her door with a note written in purple ink. She went to a birthday party in the church's side yard where someone grilled hot dogs in a drizzle and kids invented a game called Puddle Commander. She sent a text to Eddie asking if he preferred raisins or chocolate chips and granola bars, then laughed at herself and bought both. She called her mother and did not try to win the conversation. She just listened until listening sounded like love. There were missteps. One Sunday, she offered a suggestion with the sharpness of someone who still believes the fastest way to be useful is to be right. Jay stiffened. Later, she found him loading trays into the van. "I was short with you," she said. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, then nodded. "Me too. Been a week." That was all. It was enough. On a quiet afternoon, Pastor Daniel found her restocking the cupboard with paper plates. He leaned on the doorframe. "How's your courage?" She considered. "Bigger than my fear. On most days." He smiled. "That'll do. Luke, chapter 11, verse 9. Keep knocking. Sometimes the door is your own chest. Sometimes it's the church's." "True," he said, sobered. "If we miss you, knock louder." She laughed. "I will." Outside, the city went on being itself. Sirens and pigeons, storefronts and scaffolding, old griefs and new songs. Lena walked toward the bus stop and saw, across the street, the group from the rooftops spilling out of a cafe, their laughter buoyant, their faces handsome with belonging. One of them caught her eye and lifted a hand in a half wave of recognition. She lifted hers back, a small salute, then turned when she heard her name called from the other direction. Ruth stood at the corner with 2 umbrellas and a grin. "Choose your shield," she said. Lena did. They crossed the street together as the first drops began. They walked to the bus with the easy silence of people deciding the same thing without saying it. At the shelter, a gust pushed rain sideways and they laughed, pressed shoulder to shoulder while the city rehearsed its storms. The next week, a note appeared on the church bulletin board above the paper plates. Saturday. River cleanup. Bring gloves. Bring a friend. Bring a sense of humor. Lena tore off a tab with the address and folded it into her wallet like a ticket to a small courage. Saturday smelled like mud and leaf rot and something metallic in the wind. Volunteers in cheap ponchos fanned out along the bank. Jay handed her a grabber tool with a flourish. "You look like you should name this," he said. "Excalibur, but for litter." "Magnus the Picker," she said, surprising herself again. They worked in pairs. Pastor Daniel heaved a busted tire up the slope with two teenagers while calling out encouragements that were mostly jokes. Ruth collected bottles and sang under her breath. Across the path, Eddie was there, wearing a borrowed jacket, moving slowly but steady, stopping often to catch his breath. Lena watched him as one watches a kite, the way a small pull kept him aloft. "Eddie," Pastor Daniel called, straightening from the tire. Luke, chapter 12, verse 32. "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." This morning, the kingdom looks like dry socks and chili. Eddie grinned without showing teeth. "I'll take the socks," he said, "and the verse." By noon, they had filled a small mountain of trash bags. Someone set a pot of chili on a camp stove. Steam lifted like a benediction. As they ate out of paper bowls, the river burned sunlight through a break in the clouds. "Do you ever still feel alone?" Lena asked Ruth, more to name her own feeling than to interrogate Ruth's. "Of course," Ruth said. "But now it's like weather moving through a room with open windows. It doesn't have to settle." On Tuesday, the hospital felt like an engine running too hot. An elevator jammed on the third floor. Tempers peeled back their polite coverings, and Lena could not find a pen that worked. Mid-afternoon, she saw Eddie in the lobby, head low, jacket zipped to his chin. "You okay?" she asked. "Got moved along from the overpass," he said. "Police said no camping." "Fair enough. Don't know where to go until the shelter opens." She checked the wall clock. 2 hours until intake. She pictured the waiting room chairs, the fluorescent light that bleaches color from faces. "You want to sit in the chapel?" she asked. "It's quiet, and no one has the authority to frown at you there." He hesitated, then nodded. In the small room with stained glass squares like candy, he sat in the back row and exhaled a long, careful breath. Lena stood near the door, listening to the hum of the air vent and the distant ping of a heart monitor. Eddie's hands lay open on his knees. "You can pray," she said, "or nap. Napping is a spiritual gift on Tuesdays." He snorted. "You pray. I'll practice the other." She did, not eloquently, just words stacked like kindling. Safety, shelter, a name remembered, a door that stays open a little longer than usual. When she finished, Eddie was breathing evenly, mouth slightly open. She slipped out and returned to her desk. An hour later, a young woman stormed up, hair wet, eyes bright with fury. "No one told me this form existed," she snapped, tossing a paper that flapped like a wounded bird. Lena caught it. "You're right to be upset," she said, steady. "It should have been clear. Sit with me. We'll call together." They were on hold long enough to memorize the music loop. The woman's shoulders softened. "I'm sorry," she said. "My mom is sick, and I hate being the adult in the room." "I hate it too," Lena said. "But we're good at it." They smiled. teammates for a moment in a game no one asked to play. That night, thunder muscled the sky. The group chat lit with invitations and inside jokes that had missed her on purpose for a year and now wanted her on convenience. She put the phone face down and opened a new message instead. To Pastor Daniel. The cursor blinked. She wrote, "I think I need to talk about something I broke and the way it keeps breaking me." He replied within minutes. "Front steps tomorrow at 4. Rain or shine. We have umbrellas. And if it's a confession, we have better than umbrellas." At 4, rain stitched the air into curtains. Pastor Daniel sat on the steps with a thermos. "I brought the good coffee," he said. "Confession deserves good coffee." She sat beside him, knees pressed into the edge of the stone, and told the story she had kept behind her teeth. A friend she had humiliated with a joke told to the wrong person. The apology she never made. The salt she poured into her own soil afterward, saying she didn't need anyone to grow. As she spoke, rain darkened the concrete until the steps looked like a map rinsed of its borders. When she finished, he nodded. The kind of nod that says I heard every word. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said. "I have bad news and better news." "Bad news first," she said, because she was brave enough now. "You cannot edit the past," he said gently. "Better news, you are not condemned to keep reprinting it." Mark chapter 2. Again, the roof breakers. Jesus saw their faith. Sometimes faith looks like repairing the roof you kicked in. "I don't know if she'll answer," Lena said, "or if she should." "Then make your side of the bridge sound," he said. "You can't make anyone cross it, but you can stand there without pride, without excuses, with love. And whether she comes or not, you'll find you're not standing alone." He bowed his head. "Let's bring this into the light." He prayed simply, as he always did, not performing for God, but speaking with him. "Jesus, you said, 'Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you.' Give Lena a brave peace. Help her to repent with clarity and without self-hate. Heal what can be healed. Guard what cannot." The next morning, Lena wrote the message she had drafted 100 times and deleted. This time, she sent it. She did not make her sin small. She did not make her friend big with flattery. She told the truth and asked forgiveness with no deadline attached. She almost threw up. Then she went to work. The reply did not come that day or the next. Waiting learned a chair. She resisted checking and rechecking, training her heart to breathe in a rhythm not set by notifications. She cooked a pot of rice too big for one person and packed half to bring to Wednesday table. She walked Ruth to the clinic and back and learned the name of the receptionist who always wore blue earrings on Fridays. On Sunday, Pastor Daniel preached what sounded like a letter he had found on the church steps. "Brothers and sisters," he said. John chapter 15, verse 15. "I have called you friends." The world says friendship is chosen by affinity and sustained by mutual benefit. Jesus says friendship is chosen by love and sustained by sacrifice. To be befriended by Christ is to be sent out as a friend, especially to those who cannot repay you in networking favors. After the benediction, Lena's phone buzzed. A reply. She stepped outside, read it once, then again. "I'm not ready to talk," it said. "But I'm grateful you said all that. It mattered." She stood on the church lawn and let the rain baptize her hairline. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something. It was honest ground. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and went to stack chairs. That week, Eddie disappeared from his usual corner. The spot by the bakery stayed empty through 2 mornings. Worry braided itself to Lena's errands. On Thursday, Pastor Daniel texted the prayer thread. "Anyone seen Eddie? Shelter says he missed 2 nights. Hospital has him. Room 6B. Pneumonia." Lena finished her shift and took the elevator to the 6th floor. 6B smelled faintly of antiseptic and citrus cleaner. Eddie lay small under white sheets, oxygen cannula in his nose, beard trimmed shorter than usual by protocol. He opened one eye. "They found me," he rasped. "So did we," she said, taking the chair. "And we brought contraband." She lifted a plastic bag with 2 muffins from the bakery. "For when they say you can chew again." He smiled, the kind that rearranges a face more than a laugh. "Tell the verse again," he whispered. She leaned close. "Fear not, little flock," she said, slow, because breath is a kind of sacred punctuation. "For it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He nodded, the cannula hissing like a tame snake. "That one." The nurse came in, fussed with lines, then grinned. "He keeps asking about socks," she said. "Says the kingdom is warm feet." "It's in the Greek," Lena said, deadpan. The nurse laughed. Eddie wheezed a chuckle that did not entirely become a cough. When she left, she texted Ruth and Jay and Mira. By evening, a small parade had formed. Someone with a paperback. Someone with a harmonica that the nurse immediately banned. Someone with the kind of silence that knows how to sit. Pastor Daniel came last, dropped a pair of new socks on the bedside table, and said, "Brothers and sisters, when Jesus saw their faith." Eddie slept while they prayed. They prayed anyway. They prayed because sometimes faith looks like filling a room with quiet love and refusing to let a man be alone with his breath. They prayed because loneliness is loudest in hospital rooms, and the gospel teaches the church to hum louder. Outside, the city exhaled steam into the cold. Lena walked down Mercy Street with her hood pushed back to feel the air on her face. She passed the church. The door was dark, the banner limp. She touched the worn wood anyway. A habit now, a small gratitude. Then she went home to write another message that did not demand a reply, to set aside another serving of food she would not eat alone, to lay out socks for a man whose feet were also her own somehow. In the way that, in Christ, everything begins to belong to everyone else. 2 days later, Eddie's fever broke like a storm that had decided to spend itself somewhere else. When Lena arrived after her shift, he was propped up, sipping ice water with the careful dignity of a man practicing gratitude in small sips. A pair of thick, ridiculous socks hugged his ankles, blue with tiny yellow crowns. "Royal issue," he croaked, wiggling his toes. "Exclusive to kingdom citizens," she said. He grinned, and the room felt less like a border crossing and more like a porch. Pastor Daniel came by with a paperback psalter and read in a voice that sounded like someone setting a lamp on a table. He didn't quote chapter and verse aloud in the room. He saved that for the pulpit, but he prayed in the old cadence, and Eddie closed his eyes as if the words were rain on a tin roof he recognized from childhood. Ruth shuffled in behind him with a plastic bag of clementines. "Vitamin C and joy," she announced. She peeled one and placed the orange moons in a paper cup. That night, as Lena walked home, her phone buzzed again. The friend, the one she had wounded. "Want to meet sometime? Maybe next week. Not ready for long. Coffee?" She read it at the crosswalk and forgot the light had changed until a horn nudged her back into the moment. On her small kitchen table, she wrote the date and time on a sticky note and pressed it under a magnet shaped like a fish. She did the dishes without counting them and slept without bargaining. By Sunday, Eddie had a discharge plan and a list of follow-ups longer than his arm. The church clapped softly when Pastor Daniel announced it from the front. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "the Good Shepherd has carried a friend of ours a little nearer home." After the service, the teenager with the 3 chords timidly tried a 4th. He missed it, laughed, tried again. Mira sang harmonies under her breath. Wednesday table rolled on like a tide that was learning its own schedule. Lena arrived early and found Jay setting up the long rectangle of folding tables. "I'm making stew," he said. The recipe said season to taste, which is code for forgive yourself at least once. "I can chop," Lena said. "You can also taste and tell me the truth," Jay replied. "I like honest friends more than perfect food." She did both. When the pot began to do its small volcano, Ruth pinned up a paper sign. "Spare chair." "What's that?" Mira asked. "An idea in search of a life," Ruth said. "Lena's been saving seats without saying so. Thought we'd make it official. You see someone standing alone, you bring them to the spare chair. If you're the one who needs it, sit there and let us find you." Mira drew a little chair next to the words, in purple ink. By the first ladle, someone was already sitting there. A man with the posture of a question mark. He blinked as people approached him one by one, answering a question he hadn't asked with their names. The day of the coffee came gray and undecided, the kind of morning that cannot remember if it promised sun. Lena chose a table near the window and kept her hands wrapped around the mug like a ritual against flight. When her friend walked in, Lena saw all the versions of her at once. The sophomore who'd shared a thrifted coat, the coworker who typed too fast when deadlines pressed, the woman who would look like a stranger across crowded rooms for a year. "Thanks for meeting," her friend said, setting down a bag without sitting. "Thanks for replying," Lena answered, and then she did what she had practiced in her living room with no audience. She apologized again. Not as a performance, but as an offering, specific and unornamented, not asking for anything back. She spoke of the jokes she had told, and the way she had carried herself afterward like a judge in her own trial. She did not call it a misunderstanding. She called it unkindness. Her friend listened, arms crossed, uncrossed. "I needed time to believe the apology wasn't another way to control the story," she said. "It matters that you didn't make me give you closure." "I brought you nothing to sign," Lena said, and the ghost of a smile crossed the other woman's face. "I'm not ready to be friends like before," her friend said. "I don't know if I will be. But I don't wish you smallness. I hope your life is wide." "Thank you," Lena said, tears gathering without spectacle. "I hope yours is too." They sat for a while and let the coffee go cold. When they stood, it felt like laying down a load on the right side of the road, even if they never walked there together again. At church that evening, during prayer, Pastor Daniel's voice held a brightness that was not from the lights. "Brothers and sisters," Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. "Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." The Lord is telling us that the front door of heaven's house swings on the hinge of ordinary kindness. Spare chair is not cute, it's kingdom. After amen, he found Lena stacking cups by the sink. "How did it go?" he asked. She nodded, contemplating her reflection in a puddle on the counter that stubbornly refused to be wiped in one swipe. "We didn't fix the past," she said. "We told the truth in the present." "That often counts as miracle," he said. "Sometimes faith isn't fireworks, it's accurate sentences." Summer started to press its palm against the city's windows. Heat rose through sidewalks. Kids invented shade by standing close to each other. Eddie returned to his corner, thinner but steady, with a calendar of appointments and a small army of church folk who had memorized his schedule. One afternoon, Lena found him on the steps of the sanctuary, folding a flyer carefully into his jacket pocket. "You should read the fine print," he said, eyes bright. "It says I can come to the front door like a regular person." "It's true," she said. "The backdoor union went on strike." "I heard there's a spare chair with my name on it," he said. "Who told you?" she asked. He looked up at the steeple as if it were telling jokes. "Everybody," he said. "And also the sign." The church's small mercies multiplied in ways that refused to be tracked. The teenager with 3 chords learned 6 and led a song one Sunday that made people cry without knowing why. Mira started a Saturday morning paper and prayer for anyone who wanted to draw or write quietly in the same room. Jay taught a class called Reasonable Stew. Once a month, Pastor Daniel preached shorter and left extra time for testimony, which terrified everyone and then somehow drew them like gravity. On one of those Sundays, a woman stood with hands trembling but voice steady. "I thought I had no friends," she said. "Now I have 3. Sometimes that's harder, because now I can be hurt. But it's better, because now I can be loved." The room said amen in different languages. Lena sat near the aisle, watching dust lift and shimmer in the slant of light. She thought of the first night she had slipped in and tried to make herself invisible. She thought of the hospital chapel, the socks with crowns, the coffee that went cold for the right reasons. She thought of the rooftop invitations that still arrived sometimes, and how she could now say yes or no without bargaining her worth either way. That week, the hospital chapel became a place she visited on purpose, not only on behalf of others. She sat in the back row where Eddie had slept and let silence be a friend. She did not always feel prayer, but she kept company with God until feeling discovered her. When a volunteer came in to refill the box of tissues, he nodded as if they belonged there equally. On Friday, Ruth texted, "Doctor says I am boring, which is medical for stable. Celebrate with a walk?" They met beneath the bus shelter again, the plexiglass etched more deeply now with initials that changed nothing about the rain. They shared the umbrella, and at the crosswalk, Eddie fell into step on Ruth's other side without needing to be asked. The 3 of them moved like a small procession, unimportant to the city at large and indispensable to one another. John, chapter 15, verse 15. Pastor Daniel said on Sunday, the words riding the air like kites that knew how to catch wind. "I have called you friends." This is Jesus naming you. Wear it like socks with crowns. Walk it down Mercy Street. Bring an extra pair. Lena laughed out loud and startled herself. She looked around to see who had heard, and found Jay looking back with a grin. Mira lifting a purple pen like a toast. The teenager with the guitar giving a shy salute. She lifted her hand in answer. Across the aisle, the spare chair sat empty for a moment, waiting like a held breath. Then someone new walked in, scanning the room as if for exits and mercy. Ruth rose, slow but sure, and guided them toward the sign. Later, as the sanctuary emptied to the soft clatter of plates, Lena stood at the front steps where rain had baptized so many confessions. She touched the worn groove on the railing where hands had taught wood to remember. Her phone buzzed. A new message from her former friend. "I hope you're well today." It was not a beginning or an ending. It was a thread. She typed back, "Today I'm helping serve stew. There's a spare chair if you ever need one. No pressure, just a place." She hit send, then put the phone away and went downstairs to ladle, to listen, to learn names that would become stories. The room warmed, voices stacking into a comfort no algorithm could invent. Outside, the city rehearsed its storms. Inside, someone set another place. Summer leaned hard on the city, and the forecast pinned a red exclamation point over the week. By Wednesday noon, heat rose off the sidewalks in visible shivers. By evening, thunder stacked behind the skyline like a withheld decision. The folding tables in the church basement hummed with fans as people set out spoons and bowls that stuck briefly to the skin. "Spare chair is going to need a cousin," Jay said, fanning himself with a paper plate. "Spare fan?" Mira offered, hair up, pen tucked behind her ear. "Spare room," Ruth said, nodding toward the fellowship hall. "Storm's coming." Pastor Daniel stepped into the doorway with his Bible in the crook of his arm and a battery-powered lantern in his free hand. "Brothers and sisters," he said, a smile at the edge of urgency. "If the power goes, the church doesn't. We'll open the sanctuary as a cooling and shelter space if needed. If you have extra blankets, bring them. If you have extra patience, bring that first." The storm arrived early, shouldering the doors, flattening the trees along Mercy Street. The first crack of thunder rolled cups and conversation to a stop. The lights flickered, steadied, flickered again, went out. A cheer rose, thin and brave. The generator grumbled awake and pushed a small wedge of light into the dark. Lena moved without being told, hands finding the lanterns, mind inventorying faces, feet carrying her toward the sanctuary where people were already drifting, drawn by habit to pews when the world shook. Eddie appeared in the doorway in his jacket, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes bright with the old feeling of having a place to be. "Front pew concierge," he said, pointing at himself. "Official title," Lena said. "Benefits include chili and the kingdom." He winked. "I like this HR department." They set out water jugs, lined up blankets like low hills, taped paper signs. "Bathroom, nurse's station," which meant the back pew with a first aid kit and a prayer. The teenager with 6 chords brought his guitar and sat cross-legged near the front, strumming quietly, a thread of sound through the clatter of thunder and the white noise of rain. A woman from the neighborhood staggered in with 2 small children and a bag of diapers. Ruth met her halfway and ushered them toward a pew like a gatekeeper of gentleness. "You're early to the sleepover," she said, as if the woman had arrived for something planned and not desperate. "Best beds are up front." At the hospital, the storm had already strained tempers and systems. Lena's shift ended in dim hallways lit by emergency strips. The waiting room, a low drone of worry. She stopped by the chapel before she left. The stained glass squares were dark now, moon quiet. The air conditioner had surrendered. A janitor leaned on a mop and nodded to her as if they were co-conspirators in keeping the floor from collapsing. When Lena pushed through the church doors again, the sanctuary had become a camp. People lay on blankets or sat with knees up. Children turned pews into pirate ships. Elderly neighbors kept counsel on the aisle. Pastor Daniel stood near the chancel with a lantern that made his face look like an old painting. "Brothers and sisters," he called, and the room turned toward him, because storms make people remember where voices come from. Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." If you need rest, you're in the right place. If you have rest, lend it. He looked toward the doors where wind kept testing the hinges. Luke, chapter 8, verse 24. He awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. We are not the ones who rebuke storms, but we belong to the one who does. Until he says, "Be still," we say, "Be together." People settled, as if the words had rearranged the furniture inside them. Jay and Mira ferried cups. Ruth counted children twice, and then again with a satisfied sigh. Eddie did greet work with the seriousness of a man who knows that doors can be the loneliest thing to face alone. The teenager played the same progression, over and over, until it felt like a pulse under the room. Lena found herself near the spare chair sign, now taped to the end of a front pew. It had become a beacon. A woman with wet hair and careful eyeliner hovered, scanning for exits and mercy. "I'm Lena," she said, offering a towel like a liturgy. "This is the chair that waits for you." The woman sat, shaky smile a white flag. "I live 3 blocks over," she said. Lights went. Kids loud. I walked. "We're loud in a different key," Lena said. "Sit. Breathe. We have stew that forgives itself." An hour passed on a slow rope. The storm bullied, then sulked. From the back, someone coughed in a way that made people look up. "I'm fine," the cougher said automatically, which is a sentence that begs for friendship. A nurse from the congregation, off shift by luck, in scrubs by life, went to sit beside him, measured breath with a hand on a shoulder, and the room learned another meaning of care. Ruth rose to refill waters and swayed. Lena was at her side before the sway finished. "Sit," Lena said, but without scold. "Let me be the one who carries the pitcher." "I will," Ruth said, sinking down, cheeks flushing with the indignity of being a person. "Tell me something only you know about that pitcher." "It's heavier when I want to prove something," Lena said, and Ruth's laugh wove itself with the thunder. Near midnight, as if to show off, the storm tried to tear the roof. The windows rattled their loose thoughts. A child cried. A father's hand found the small spine and traced circles that probably saved more than one life. Pastor Daniel lifted the lantern higher. "If you're afraid, you're in good company," he said, not shouting, because shouting breaks. "You don't have to be brave alone." The doors opened again, wind shoving an umbrella inside like a reluctant guest. Behind it, a woman shook rain from her sleeves. Lena blinked. Her former friend stood there, hair soaked, eyes searching. A thermos tucked into the crook of one arm. "I brought coffee," she said to the room in general. Then her gaze caught on Lena as if a compass had found north against its will. "And socks," she added, lifting a grocery bag with the sheepish pride of someone who hopes they guessed right. Lena crossed the aisle without planning. "We have a spare chair," she said, steady as the lantern's circle. "I saw," her friend said. She smiled in a way that was both apology and weather report. Conditions improving, visibility variable. They set the thermos on the table. The scent lifted like a promise. Someone cheered quietly for the socks. The teenager faltered, then found his chord again. Eddie took the coffee cup that Lena handed him, lifted it in salute toward the new arrival, and said, "Welcome to the front door." They passed cups. They traded blankets. They rode the long night not as heroes, but as people who had decided in advance to be a certain kind of neighbor. Pastor Daniel sat on the steps sometime around 2 and let his head rest against the banister. The lantern threw a small halo around the familiar exhaustion. Just before dawn, the storm broke like a tantrum that had run out of steam. The last thunder rolled away toward the river and did not come back. Rain softened to a kindness. The room exhaled as if someone had opened every window at once. The lights stuttered, flickered, returned. A half-joke applause turned into the real thing. "Brothers and sisters," Pastor Daniel said, voice rough with relief, "we made it through together. Not because we are strong, but because He is present." He looked up as if to thank the rafters for not practicing baptism. "If you need to sleep, sleep. If you need to sing, hum quietly. If you need to cry, that's permitted without forms." Lena stood near the spare chair, watching sunrise smuggle color back into stained glass. Her friend poured coffee into paper cups with a competence that made the line move, fielding thank yous with nods that meant see you again. Ruth doled socks like sacraments. Eddie dozed, his ridiculous crowns pointing toward an invisible standard. In the soft light, everything looked truer. The pews were scratched. The carpet was tired. The banner near the door still said, "You are not alone." Faded but legible, like a sentence someone had begun years ago, and everyone kept finishing with their lives. Outside, branches littered the street like punctuation marks. Inside, the congregation began its slow unspooling toward home. Blankets folded, lanterns clicked off, chairs returned, names exchanged that would later become calls. Lena carried a stack of bowls to the kitchen and found herself humming the teenager's four-chord Bravery. On the steps, Pastor Daniel tilted his face into the new air. He spoke softly, but the words carried to where Lena stood. John, chapter 14, verse 18, he said, "To no one and to everyone, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you." Lena looked at the doorway, at the groove worn by 1,000 faithful hands, and thought, "He did. He came. He keeps coming." She dried the bowls and went back for more. By afternoon, sun slid out from behind the torn clouds and laid a clean coin of light on Mercy Street. The neighborhood came outside to measure the damage and stayed to trade stories. A crew from the church dragged limbs to the curb. Kids stacked twigs into forts that pretended to be castles. The spare chair sign went back to the basement wall, damp at the edges, a little more seasoned. Lena finished the bowls and stepped to the doorway with a trash bag. Her former friend stood on the steps, sleeves rolled, hair already drying into the shape Lena remembered from 100 ordinary days. They looked at each other like people who had crossed the same river at different times and now stood on the same bank. "Do you need me to run anything?" her friend asked. "Yes," Lena said, because the friendship she wanted required verbs. "Can you take this bag to the alley? And if you find the broom with no bristles, marry it to the dustpan with no handle." Her friend laughed, startled into ease. "A match made in maintenance." They fell into a rhythm without naming it. Handing, sweeping, carrying, pausing for water that tasted like gratitude. When the last chair had scraped into place and the last tablecloth had been shook into a small storm of crumbs, they stood together at the top of the fellowship hall stairs and watched the room remember its shape. "Thank you for coming last night," Lena said. "You could have gone anywhere." "I wanted a dry roof," her friend said, then added softer, "And I wanted to see if you meant what you said." "I do," Lena said. And because she was learning to let sentences stand without scaffolding, she left it there. The next week, heat returned with a stubbornness that made tempers brittle. At the hospital, a man slammed a clipboard on the counter, hard enough to echo. A child kicked a chair, not in rebellion, but in bewilderment. Lena moved through it with a steadiness she did not recognize as her own. In the chapel, she lit no candle, only sat in the shade of silence and let it teach her to breathe without hurry. On Wednesday, the spare chair found a new occupant before the first ladle was lifted. A teenager in a hoodie sat with shoulders up like a bridge raised against traffic. Ruth slid a glass of water onto the pew arm, then walked away as if she had only put it there for anyone. The teenager lowered the hood an inch, then another, eyes tracking the room's kindness like a wary creature learning a new trail. Pastor Daniel started the prayer time with the lantern on the table for no reason but memory. "Brothers and sisters," he said, voice warm with leftover weather. "John, chapter 13, verse 34. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Not fondness, not preference. Love. Tonight, that might look like giving someone the last biscuit you wanted. It might look like silence that listens all the way to the period. They prayed. They ate. They put names to faces and faces to stories and stories to intercessions that would live in pockets and phone reminders and the reflex that turns footsteps toward the front steps at 4 o'clock. After cleanup, when only a few lingered over coffee rings and a single heroic cookie, Pastor Daniel leaned on the counter near Lena. "You're steadier," he said, not as a compliment, but as a witness. "Sometimes," she answered. "Sometimes I still want to build a moat." "Build a porch," he said. "Then sit on it when you're tired. You don't have to work every door." She thought of the rooftop invitations that had resumed their casual brightness, of the texts she now answered without auditioning for a part she didn't want. She nodded. "I'm learning to let no be holy." "Good," he said. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Let your light shine before others. You can't shine everything everywhere, all at once. Lamps have tables. Late July brought a Saturday the church called Serve the Street, which meant sweeping, painting, fixing, feeding, and stopping on purpose whenever eyes looked red or shoulders sagged. Jay led a crew to repaint the railings. Mira organized a free notes table where kids could write thank you cards to anyone they decided deserved one. Ruth deployed folding chairs like a general of rest. The teenager, with 7 chords now, maybe 8, sat on the stoop and played songs that sounded like hope with calluses. Eddie arrived with a box of donated toiletries and a pride that was almost shy. He had found temporary housing at a church-owned apartment with soft sheets and rules that felt like scaffolding rather than bars. He took up a post by the front door, handing out toothbrushes as if they were medals. "Royal issue," he said, winking at each perplexed recipient. "Exclusive to Kingdom citizens." Lena and her friend painted trim the color of new possibility. They worked mostly in silence, a good kind that stacked between them like lumber for something future. Now and then, they traded a story that belonged to that day only. When they finished, they stood back with flecks on their arms and the kind of smile that is not about paint. In the afternoon, a woman from 3 houses down wandered over, arms crossed tightly, expression organized into indifference. "What are you selling?" she asked. "Nothing," Lena said. "We're just trying to make the block look like a place we meant to live." The woman looked at the trim, at the broom army, at the free notes table where a boy wrote, "Thank you, trash truck," in fierce letters. Her arms loosened. "My porch light has been dead since winter," she said, not quite asking. "I have a ladder and maladaptive confidence," Jay called, already moving. Evening pooled in the gutters. Someone brought out a portable speaker and played old soul records. Someone else danced terribly on purpose. Pastor Daniel stood on the top step and lifted his hands as if weighing the day and finding it equal to mercy. "Brothers and sisters," he said. Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. "As you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me." Today, you fed Jesus chili and painted his trim and replaced his light bulb. He's very pleased with his porch. Laughter rose, the kind that cleans old corners. The block clapped for itself and meant it. That night, the rooftop crew messaged again. "Open mic at Morrow's. Come tell that story about the traffic cone." Lena typed, "Tonight I'm at Mercy Street," then deleted the explanation and left it clean. She sat on her bed with the window open, listening to the city do its nighttime math. She was not lonely. She was not crowded. She was held. She slept like someone trusting a guard at the door. Days rolled into a pattern that felt made rather than fallen into. Fridays with Ruth, now mostly for walking, and the small joy of scheduling something with a person who would show up. Hospital mornings, where kindness and policy balanced on a wire, and Lena learned that even on the days she felt thin, she could still choose gentleness without error. Afternoons when the front steps held conversations that tasted like peppermint tea and confession, sometimes both. One afternoon, the teenager, name finally volunteered as Theo, stood beside Pastor Daniel on the steps, guitar slung. "I think I want to be baptized," he said, looking at his shoes. Pastor Daniel's face broke into the small smile he reserved for sentences like a sunrise. "All right," he said. "River or font?" "River," Theo said. "I want to remember the water moving like it means it." "Then we'll go to the bend where it slows enough to be kind," Pastor Daniel said. He looked at Lena, who had paused because some sentences are the kind you stand still for. "You should come," he said. "You and the spare chair brigade. Bring towels and a song." On the day of the baptism, the congregation gathered at the river bend, where the cleanup team had once stood hip-deep in trash and intention. The water shouldered by. The sky wore its best blue without gloating. Theo stepped into the river with a seriousness that looked like Joy's older brother. Pastor Daniel spoke to the gathered. "Brothers and sisters, Romans says we are buried with him by baptism into death, in order that, just as Christ was raised, we too might walk in newness of life." And then he lowered Theo into water that took its time. When Theo rose, he wiped his face and laughed the laugh of a boy whose lungs had elected hope. Ruth clapped like rainfall. Eddie cheered with both hands in the air, socks with crowns peeking above his shoes. Lena stood near the bank with her friend and felt the day lift a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. They sang something simple. They wrapped Theo in towels like a promise. They ate cupcakes like a sacrament. And as the afternoon leaned toward evening, Pastor Daniel stood with his pant legs dripping and lifted his voice once more. "John, chapter 15, verse 15, he called. "Because repetition is a kindness. I have called you friends. Remember it when the invitation doesn't come. Remember it when the room is full. Remember it when you carry mats and when you need to be carried." On the walk back up Mercy Street, the spare chair sign flapped in a mild breeze from its spot on the Fellowship Hall wall. A newcomer lingered near it, fingers worrying the corner of a bulletin. Lena stopped, set her bag down, and sat in the chair herself, patting the space beside her. "It waits for you," she said, when the newcomer looked puzzled. "For me?" the woman asked, incredulous. "For you," Lena said, "and for me, and for everyone who thought the sentence ended with 'left out.'" "It doesn't. There's more after that. Sit and see." The woman sat. The two of them looked out at the humming room. Someone started a pot of coffee that was probably too strong. Someone tuned a guitar set to the key of courage. Someone taped up a fresh paper sign over the old one, letters darker but the same. "You are not alone." Autumn shouldered summer aside with a cooler hand and a different kind of light. Mercy Street learned to breathe through sweaters again. Leaves skittered like little letters no one had time to read. The spare chair sign curled a corner. Someone taped it flat with a strip of blue painter's tape that looked like a quiet promise. One Sunday, Pastor Daniel stood at the rail with a carpenter's pencil behind his ear, a leftover from Serve the Street. "Brothers and sisters," he said, eyes bright. "Matthew, chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock." He moved his hand toward the rafters, as if blessing them for holding the storm. "We lived that parable last month. Let's keep living it." We're starting the porch project. Literal porches, broken steps, railings with splinters, and the other kind of porches, too. Conversations left half-built, apologies waiting for nails. If you've got a hammer, bring it. If you've got a sentence you've been afraid to say, bring that first. On Saturday, Lena joined a team outside a narrow row house whose porch leaned like a tired shoulder. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, watched from a lawn chair with the solemnity of a man honoring the dead. "My wife loved to sit out here," he said, thumb smoothing the armrest as if it were a cheek. "When it broke, I went inside and didn't come back out." "We'll give you your front row again," Jay said, measuring out hope with the tape. Lena carried boards, learned the soft geometry of angles that actually meet. A familiar voice called her name, and she turned, startled to find her former friend stepping through the gate with a toolbox. "I can't build," she said quickly, "but I can hold and not drop." "You can paint," Jay called, delighted. "And you can tell me if this railing feels like a hand you'd trust." They worked in a cloud of sawdust that made the sun look kind. Mr. Alvarez told them about a dog named Tico who used to fall asleep under the second step, about a granddaughter who mailed letters with stickers that stuck to his fingers. By late afternoon, the porch sat level, proud without swagger. Mr. Alvarez stood, tested the boards, then sat again with the weight of someone reclaiming a verb. "Thank you," he said, and his voice did not wobble. "I will have coffee here tomorrow. Maybe 2. Lena and her friend walked back to Mercy Street with paint freckles on their arms. "I keep wanting to ask where we are," her friend said, not looking at her. "On a sidewalk with a good porch behind us," Lena said, "and further than before." At Wednesday table, the teenager in the hoodie, who finally offered a name, Noor, hovered at the edge of the spare chair until Ruth waved them in with a spoon like a conductor's baton. Noor sat, eyes down, hands tucked into sleeves. Later, when the room thinned, Lena found Noor near the bulletin board, staring at a flyer for tutoring. "You thinking of going?" Lena asked. Noor shrugged. "I stopped going to school." "Stopped is a pause word," Lena said. "Pauses can end." Noor's mouth tilted, almost a smile. "I'm not good at people." "Join the club," Lena said, and pointed to the room. "We all pay dues." They showed up the next night to meet Mira with a notebook and a blunt pencil. Afterward, Noor lingered by the spare chair, dragging a thumb along the grain as if reading Braille. "Thanks," they said, without looking up. "For which part?" Lena asked. "For not making this a speech." Eddie came by the church less because he had to, and more because he wanted to, which felt like a graduation. He kept keys now. Apartment, mailbox, locker at the day job stocking deliveries, and jingled them absent-mindedly like a blessing he could not stop hearing. "Royal issue," he said, and the joke didn't get old. One afternoon, the rooftop group posted a photo from Morrow's. Microphones, amber glasses, the kind of light that makes everyone look generous. A comment tagged Lena. "Come tell the traffic cone story. We'll buy your drink." She looked at the screen without bitterness and typed, "Maybe another time." Then she texted Theo. "Need help moving the keyboard downstairs?" He answered with a string of excited vowels that meant yes in the language of 19-year-olds. On a gray Tuesday, the hospital waited. Room throbbed with impatience. A woman snapped, a man swore, a child cried until crying turned into small, silent shudders. At the desk, Lena heard a shout and a sentence with her name in it that wasn't kind. She stepped back, kept her voice low, and let the first heat pass. When the man's anger spent itself into shame, she slid a box of tissues across the counter like a lifeline. "I can't change the policy," she said, "but I can make the call with you." He stared, then nodded. Later, As the call music droned through its arpeggios, he said, not looking at her, "I haven't had a friend in a long time." "You do for the next 10 minutes, she said. It wasn't poetry. It was practice. October arrived with an economy of light and a generosity of sky. On the first chilly Sunday, Pastor Daniel preached shorter and left the last 10 minutes for the church to talk back. An older woman spoke of the first time anyone had called her by name after her husband died. Noor stood and, almost whispering, said they were going back to school part-time. Eddie lifted his keys and the room laughed its approval. Then Pastor Daniel lifted his hand. Brothers and sisters, Luke, chapter 10, verses 30 through 37. The Good Samaritan crossed the street. We do not have to be experts at love to begin. We have to change sides of the road. After service, Mira pinned a new card beside spare chair. Spare choir. No tryouts, just breath. Theo beamed like someone the sun had handed a job. Lena went home by the long way, past Mr. Alvarez's porch, where 2 mugs steamed on the rail, and a third waited for a neighbor who looked like he was deciding whether to stop. She passed the hospital chapel, empty now, and lingered at the doorway as if paying respect. She turned down Mercy Street and found her friend on the steps, hands in pockets, shoulders not so high. "Walk?" her friend asked. They walked to the river bend where Theo had sunk and risen. The water moved with the humility of something that remembers both flood and thirst. They stood without talking. Then her friend spoke into the cool air. "I am ready," she said, careful, "to be the kind of friends who keep each other honest and kind and unafraid. I'm not ready for dinners 3 times a week, and I might still say no sometimes, and I might need you to be patient on the days I disappear." "I can be that," Lena said. "And I need a friend who will tell me when I turn gentle into pleasing, and when I turn boundaries into walls." "That's a lot of carpentry," her friend said, a smile she did not hide. "I know a porch project," Lena said. They turned back toward the church as the bell rang the hour. On the steps, Pastor Daniel waved and pointed at his watch. "Spare choir meets in 5, he called. "If you can breathe, you qualify." They sang badly and with joy. Theo missed a chord and laughed in the middle of it. Ruth sat with a blanket over her lap and clapped slightly offbeat, claiming a rhythm of her own. Eddie hummed from the doorway, shy and loud at once. Noor stood against the back wall and mouthed the words like a promise they were trying on. Later, when the room emptied and the lights clicked off one by one, Lena lingered at the spare chair, running a finger along the letters where the paper had worn smooth. She sat for a minute, not because she needed rescuing, but because she wanted to honor the chair that had once rescued her. Someone new would need it tomorrow. Tonight, it held a friend. Outside, Mercy Street rustled with leaves planning their descent. Inside, the church kept its hum of refrigerator and memory. Lena stepped into the night with a steadiness she recognized now as borrowed and returned, a kind of holy circulation. The city was still itself. Sirens, scaffolds, invitations that didn't fit. But she had a porch. She had a people. She had a friend who did not leave. And the door, worn smooth by hands, remembered everyone. October thinned into a cleaner kind of cold. One night at the hospital, the elevator doors opened and sent out a man with his jacket half on and his grief all the way out. He stood at Lena's desk with empty hands. "They said 20 minutes, he said, and the number broke against his teeth. "Chapel's open," Lena said, standing too. "I can walk you there." He shook his head as if refusing a life raft. "I don't know how to be in a chapel." "You don't have to know," she said. "It knows how to be with you." They went anyway, because walking through a hallway with someone is sometimes the first prayer. In the chapel, light from the street made colored squares on the floor. The man sat and stared at the stain of blue on his shoe. Lena did not sit next to him, but one pew back, giving grief a front row seat. After a while, he spoke without turning. "My boy," he said. 18. I was on the freeway when the call came. I wanted to make time behave. She said nothing about plans or purposes. She said, "I'm here." He nodded, a small bow to an altar he couldn't see. After a time, the door opened and the night chaplain glanced in, eyes asking. Lena lifted a hand in a gesture that meant both yes and please go slow. The chaplain took the other pew behind the man and breathed like a metronome set to mercy. When Lena rose to leave, the man finally looked back. "Thank you," he said, and the words shook like a ladder but held. Outside, the air tasted like a bright apple. She sent a quick message to Pastor Daniel. "Pray for a father in the chapel." He replied a minute later, "Jesus, have mercy." He didn't add a verse. Some nights, the verses arrive on their own. At church, the Porch Project kept finding porches, and the other kind of porches too. A dry erase board near the bulletin listed the week's errands like liturgy, ride to clinic, grocery run, algebra help, cat sitting for Ms. Valdez, he bites, soup for Mr. Alvarez, porch sitting encouraged. The spare chair got a second sign beside it. Spare place. Names of families who had an extra seat at dinner on Thursdays. Lena put her name on the list with a pen that trembled. She could make rice and a stew that forgave itself. She could make time. Her former friend stood by the board, biting the cap of a marker. "I can do Sundays," she said, adding her name under spare place. Then looking at Lena with a question that wasn't about scheduling. "Come eat with me this Thursday," Lena said, before fear had time to offer alternatives. "Nothing fancy. Rice. Stew. Likely emotional honesty." Her friend laughed. "I can bring biscuits and restraint." They ate in the small kitchen, with the window cracked to the leaf smell outside. They talked about paint that never listens, about Mr. Alvarez's Tico, about Noor memorizing a math formula like a spell. After dishes, they sat with mugs and silence that stitched itself into something stable. "I keep waiting to ask if we're okay," her friend said. "And then I realize the asking is part of making it true." Lena nodded. "We don't have to be what we were. We can be what we decide." On Sunday, Pastor Daniel stepped up with a flannel shirt and a grin that lifted the tired out of the room. "Brothers and sisters," he said. Luke, chapter 14, verse 13. "But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, not because pity is fashionable, but because love puts chairs where scarcity put walls." He lifted a hand toward the fellowship hall. "Spare place is not a program. It's a table with elbows. If you're coming with an appetite and an awkward story, you're the reason we're doing it right." After service, he found Lena at the coffee urn. "You put your name down," he said, as if he'd known she would. "How did it feel?" "Like building a porch on a Tuesday," she said. "Good," he said. Matthew, chapter 14, verse 27. "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." That's a word for Thursdays, too. Late in October, the city tried on its early dark. Noor came to Wednesday table with a folder of schoolwork and a face that had learned to lift. They sat beside the spare chair without needing it and told Ruth about a teacher who had circled a sentence and written "yes" in the margin. "I didn't know a word could be heard that loud," Noor said. "Some words are built like bells," Ruth answered. They ring even on days you think you forgot them. Eddie began to show up with a new habit. He'd leave things intentionally. A pair of gloves on a radiator, a jar of pennies on the windowsill, a postcard propped against the spare chair sign. Offerings, he said when people asked, and he wouldn't explain. The postcard said in his uneven print, "Thank you for the socks, in case heaven was collecting mail." The rooftop group posted for Morrow's again. A different friend, the one who liked to tell stories into microphones, sent a voice note. "We miss you. The stage misses you. Your traffic cone timing is a sacrament." Lena listened to the compliment without swallowing it whole. "Come to the river," she typed back. "Theo is learning to play in the cold. There's a baptism planned for November if the water agrees." The dots appeared, disappeared, returned. "Maybe," came the message. She let it be. Near the end of the month, the hospital chapel filled with candles and the kind of quiet that is not empty, but alive. It was the service of names, a night for loss. Lena did not plan to attend. She wandered in anyway, because wandering had become a form of obedience. On the front pew, the father from that late shift sat with a folded program. Pastor Daniel, invited to read a prayer, stood with a voice that matched the room. He spoke of Jesus weeping at a tomb. And then, softly, he quoted John, chapter 11, verse 43. "Lazarus, come out." He let the sentence stand like a door. "Sometimes," he said, "resurrection looks like breath. Sometimes it looks like a friend who will not leave you on your worst day." Afterward, Lena found the father by the door. He looked thinner, more like a person and less like an emergency. "They read his name," he said. "It didn't break me. It felt like someone carried it to a good place." "Then we'll keep carrying," she said. It was not a promise to fix grief. It was a promise to walk near it. November turned Mercy Street into a corridor of breath and fog. On a Saturday, Lena took a bus to her mother's apartment with a bag of groceries and the kind of courage that checks its watch. She had been practicing listening all year. Now she would listen here. Her mother opened the door with a tea towel over one shoulder and the suspicion that grows where disappointment has dug. "You never visit," she said, which was true until today. "I do now," Lena said. She didn't defend her absence. She practiced arrival. They cooked quietly at first, then noisier. They ate and left the dishes to soak like old arguments. When Lena left, her mother put a hand on her cheek as if measuring fever. "Okay," her mother said. "Thursday, you come again. Bring that stew that forgives itself." "I will," Lena said, and the word felt like a rung that would hold when stepped on. The next morning on the church steps, Theo's fingers were red at the tips. "November is a liar," he said. "Looks beautiful, hurts." Pastor Daniel blew into his hands. "So does love," he said. "But it keeps you alive. Brothers and sisters, John, chapter 21, verse 12. Come and have breakfast." Jesus said that on a beach to tired friends. We'll say it here in December. Tables for strangers. No sign-ups, no speeches. Just eggs and names. Come hungry, leave known. The flyer went up on the bulletin board next to spare place. Blue painter's tape already pulled and ready. Lena traced the words with a finger. She thought of her mother at a small table, of Noor's folder, of Eddie's keys, of Mr. Alvarez's rail. She texted her former friend. "You making biscuits?" Her phone hummed back. "I'll bring two kinds." Also restraint. On a Tuesday evening, thick with cold, Lena waited in the hospital lobby for the bus. Eddie came in from the street with his collar up and a grin she recognized now as baseline. I start nights next week, he said, proud. Stocking the warehouse. Royal issue name tag. She high-fived him like a kid. He tucked his hands into his jacket. You doing okay? He asked, turning the question around like a coin. You've been carrying a lot lately. I have, she said, but I'm not carrying alone. It's ours. She thought of the groove on the church railing, of hands teaching wood to remember. She thought of a voice that said, brother and sisters, and another that said, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. The bus sighed to a stop. She stepped on and waved, feeling as the doors closed, not like someone shutting herself inside, but like someone arriving where she was meant to be. December came with a white edge and windows that fogged at the corners. Mercy Street wore scarves and a new habit of walking quickly. The flyer for Tables for Strangers multiplied on lampposts like a good rumor. Blue painter's tape did its quiet work. On the morning chosen, the fellowship hall steamed like a train station. Theo plugged in the keyboard and tested a warm chord that sounded like the sun deciding to get out of bed. Jay manned the griddle with a seriousness he usually reserved for Stu, flipping eggs and pancakes as if a tiny city depended on the timing. Ruth had stationed herself at the door with a stack of name tags and a determination to learn everyone. You tell me the name you want to hear, she said to each person. And they did. Lena's mother came with a casserole dish under one arm and a cautious expression under her hat. It's nothing special, she said, which turned out to be untrue. Lena's former friend arrived with 2 kinds of biscuits and the restraint she'd promised, and then promptly abandoned it, laughing when a child asked her if biscuits had bones. Nor hovered until Ruth steered them to the spare chair, repositioned today at the head of a table so no one had to look for it. Pastor Daniel stood on a chair, not for attention, but to find a voice above the sizzle. Brothers and sisters, he called. John chapter 21, verse 12. Come and have breakfast. He made a fire on a beach and fed tired friends. We made a griddle on Mercy Street, and we're doing the same. If you've come hungry for food, you're right on time. If you've come hungry for a name, you're even righter. They ate. The windows drew family portraits and steam and fingertip sketches. Someone started a conversation about the best way to butter a pancake. On the underside, vowed Jay, so the heat agrees. A man with a suit 2 seasons out of date showed a photo of his dog to anyone who would hold their phone long enough to admire. Eddie, off his night shift and bright with exhaustion, set down a box of oranges and proceeded to hand them out like lottery winnings. Royal issue, he said to each person, and watched tired faces grin at the joke even before they understood it. Lena moved through the room with a coffee pot and calm. When her mother waved her over, she came as if summoned by a bell. This is my daughter, her mother told Ruth, as if introducing a prize she had discovered unexpectedly in a thrift store. She makes a stew that forgives itself. I know, Ruth said, eyes twinkling. It forgave me last Wednesday. They cleared plates, refilled cups, refolded napkins that didn't need it. When the rush thinned, Pastor Daniel leaned against the counter, color back in his face from the warmth. You all right? He asked Lena's mother, not as small talk, but as the kind of question that makes space. I am less alone in a room full of strangers than I have been at home, she said frankly. That's either a miracle or a comment on my living room. Why not both? He said. There's coffee to take home if your living room needs company. By afternoon, the hall had learned to breathe under its own weight. The last of the pancakes disappeared like a magic trick. The last of the oranges rolled into pockets. Someone washed forks with the thoroughness of an apology. People lingered because leaving would end something they did not want to end. There's stew tonight, Jay announced to no one and everyone. for any stragglers who want to call themselves guests. Lena took her mother's arm on the steps. "Come Thursday," she said, and her mother said, "I'll bring the casserole that pretends to be plain." That week, cold cracked the air so hard it sounded like old wood. Pipes complained, breath turned visible and opinionated. The hospital overflowed with winter's ordinary cruelties: falls, fevers, the unkindness of brittle bones. In the waiting room, a woman in a blue coat dropped her gloves and all the composure they represented. Lena bent to pick up both. "You can fall apart here," she said softly. "We mop. Bop." On Mercy Street, the church's boiler hiccuped and then rallied with a noise like a horse deciding to pull once more. Pastor Daniel, in a knit cap he pretended not to own, made rounds with a clipboard he did not pretend about. "Check on the elders," he told anyone within earshot. "Knock twice and announce yourself like a sitcom neighbor." Lena and Noor took the south side of the street and learned the choreography of hallway rugs and door chains. Miss Valdez's cat bit them both in turn, and then decided they were furniture. Mr. Alvarez's granddaughter had taped construction paper snowflakes on the porch rail, and he insisted they take 2 each for scientific purposes. Noor stuck theirs to the inside of their notebook. "Proof winter exists," they said. On Thursday, Lena's apartment filled with stew scent and the sound of someone setting down a heavy week. Her mother arrived with the plain casserole that gave itself away on the first bite. They ate with elbows on the table and a comfort that felt new and inherited, both. "You were right," her mother said at the sink, hands in suds. "I could use a living room that knows how to be with me." "You can borrow mine," Lena said. "Church has a few too." On Sunday, the sanctuary wore Advent. Candles in a circle, greens clipped from somebody's backyard. Theo miscounted a beat and turned it into art. Pastor Daniel lifted his voice, not louder but steadier. "Brothers and sisters," he said. Luke, chapter 2, verse 10. "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people." All the people includes the person who didn't get a message back. It includes the widow who sits by the window at 4. It includes the man working nights and the teenager trying again and the mother carrying more than groceries. It includes you. After service, Eddie tugged at his new name tag as if to confirm it was still attached to him. "Warehouse is cold," he said cheerfully, "but the coffee tastes like victory." "Bring your hands by the boiler room if they forget you," Pastor Daniel said. "We have a radiator that thinks it's Pentecost." Noor drifted toward the spare chair and touched the sign like a talisman. "I passed a quiz," they announced to Lena in a tone that kept joy from escaping too fast. Mira wrote yes in the margin again. "It's a bell," Lena said. "Let it ring." And then, because stories do not choose tidy calendars. Ruth slipped on the church steps one icy morning and sat down hard. "I am fine," she declared, eyes furious at the ground, but her breath came thin and she couldn't stand without swallowing a small yelp. By afternoon, it was a hairline fracture and a pair of crutches and orders to sit still. "Sitting," Ruth informed the orders, "is not my department." The church made it theirs. Spare chair moved to Ruth's apartment for a week, in theory for visitors and in practice as a throne. Jay delivered stews like a man serving penance for every joke about seasoning. Noor brought homework and sat on the floor like a cat. Eddie came with socks that were not crowns this time but stripes, as if to remind Bones how to be strong and cheerful simultaneously. Lena learned the geography of Ruth's kitchen without asking. Where the tea lived, which mug belonged to grief and which to guests. When Ruth fretted about missing the front door duty, Lena said, "We have a relay team. The door will remember you. It has your handprint." They watched the street from the window like two bishops surveying a field. "I hate being the one who needs," Ruth said, which was of course the sentence of a woman who had learned to carry everyone else first. "I know," Lena said. "Consider this our spiritual exercise in receiving." "Bossy," Ruth accused, and smiled. A few nights later, the church ran out of gloves. The bin by the door sat as empty as a metaphor. Lena stood in the fellowship hall, scanning the shelves for anything that could be repurposed, and found instead her former friend, counting scarves. "We can buy more tomorrow," her friend said. "Tonight, we can share ours." They walked home barehanded in the cold, laughing at their stupidity and the rush of it, and the laughter felt like a language returning after a long silence. In the last week before Christmas, the spare choir attempted carols with more fervor than accuracy. Theo led and lost his way and found it again, which is how faith often sounds anyway. They took their noise to the block, stopping at porches, including Mr. Alvarez's, where 3 mugs steamed on the rail and a 4th arrived in a neighbor's hand just in time for the chorus. Eddie kept losing his place because he was too busy grinning at dogs. On Christmas Eve, the sanctuary held its breath. Candles stood like a patient army. Pastor Daniel spoke the old words with a voice that had learned new kinds of tired and new kinds of strength. "Brothers and sisters," he said, John chapter 1, verse 5. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." They passed the flame from wick to wick, hand to hand, until the room resembled a map of a city finding its power again. Lena stood between her mother and her friend, and when the light reached them, she cupped her palm to shelter the small fire and felt, in that gesture, a year's worth of steps. After the benediction, the congregation spilled into the cold like a secret shared. The moon had found the river. The river pretended not to notice. Noel hung in the air like a lazy kite. Ruth, crutched but present, smacked the spare chair with the back of her hand. "Save a seat for January," she said. "Somebody's going to need it." Lena walked home with her mother and her friend, their breath making brief ghosts. At the door of her building, her mother squeezed her arm. "Thursday," she said, as if checking a line on a list heaven might be keeping. "Thursday," Lena answered. Upstairs, the apartment was warm enough to remove coats before turning on the light. They set down bags, the little gifts that matter because they are small. Lena stood at the window and watched snow begin the slow work of covering a city that had learned, in fits and starts, how to uncover itself. She touched the sill where she kept a slip of paper from months back. A bus schedule on one side, a line on the other in her own hand. "Become the friend you wish you had." She did not feel triumphant. She felt true. In the quiet, she prayed without looking for fireworks. "Thank you for the friend who calls me friend. Thank you for a porch. Thank you for a chair that waits. Thank you for names that ring like bells." On Mercy Street, a light went on, and another, until the night looked less like an enemy and more like a country where people lived. January entered like a careful guest, quiet at first, and then everywhere at once. Mercy Street wore salt lines and the stubborn gray that makes lights matter. The spare chair sign looked almost festive with its frayed edge. Someone tucked a sprig of pine under the blue tape like a small joke against winter. Lena's days learned new routes. Thursdays with her mother became a corridor of stories that stretched backward and forward without apology. Nights sometimes ended at the church steps, where the air smelled like radiator heat and wool. On one such evening, Pastor Daniel sat with his coat collar up and his voice low. "Brothers and sisters," he said to the few who had gathered. John chapter 14, verse 1. "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me." He wasn't preaching to the crowd so much as reading a note he needed for himself. Later, when the steps emptied, he admitted to Lena that his father was sick 2 states away. "I'm good at telling other people to rest," he said, smiling without brightness. "Learning the other half." "Let us carry the mat," Lena said. The phrase had become a shorthand in their strange family. The next week, Nor arrived late to tutoring with eyes that had not slept and a bruise of a sentence hovering behind their lips. Mira shut the door, set down the worksheet, and waited without fidgeting. "My uncle says church people only care on Sundays," Nor said finally, not looking up. "He says I'm wasting time." Mira's pen stayed still. "You are not a waste," she said, each word set down like a stone in a river. "And we will still be here on a Tuesday." Lena found Nor afterward by the spare chair, tracing the nicks in the wood of the pew. "You can sit without explaining," she said. Nor did. They sat together until the heat clicked off and on again, the sound like a heartbeat learning steadiness. Eddie's nights at the warehouse turned his mornings into a kind of fog. He came by the church one afternoon and fell asleep sitting upright with a booklet open on his knee. Ruth draped a blanket over him with the tenderness of someone who knows the cost of staying. "Royal issue," she whispered, and the blanket seemed to agree. On a Tuesday at the hospital, Lena looked up to see the father from the chapel walking toward her with a suit that fit differently now and a steadier gait. He placed a folded program on the counter, the kind with a name and dates and a photo that tries to fix a face at the right age. "We said goodbye," he said. "It was not unbearable. I thought you should know." The program bore the son's picture and a smile that had learned mischief from better teachers. "The chaplain read the Lazarus verse," he added, as if reporting the weather. "It helped." "I'll carry his name with you a while," Lena said. She meant it. Grief was changing from a wave that knocked everyone down to a tide that could be watched and respected. By mid-month, the porch project list grew new items. A ramp for Ms. Valdez, caulking for windows that insisted on letting January inside. Conversation with my brother, written in shaky handwriting by Jay and circled twice. "Porches aren't just boards," he said, embarrassed and grinning. He made the call. It went badly and then better a week later. He brought stew to Wednesday table and titled it "Reasonable Reconciliation." Lena and her friend, the word holding different weight now, found a rhythm that took days off without asking and returned without apology. They walked sometimes in silence to the river and back, past the place where Theo had disappeared into summer and risen laughing. One night, her friend held out a phone with an invitation on it. Morrow's again. Open mic. The stage that had once been Gravity. "I think I'm done with that version of applause," her friend said. "I want to use words for building, not balancing on." It was not a vow. It was a porch nail. At church, Pastor Daniel preached shorter, softer, as if speaking around a bruise he did not want to show off. "Brothers and sisters," he said one Sunday. Matthew chapter 6, verse 9. "Our Father in heaven." When Jesus taught us to pray, he handed us a family word first. Some of us don't have a father who answers. We do have a father who sees. And we have brothers and sisters who can pick up the phone with us. At the end, he added, almost shy, "I'm going to see my dad this week. If I preach tired next Sunday, you have my permission to take a nap in protest." The room laughed and then did the thing it had learned. People signed the dry erase board with airport rides and casserole offers, and "I can answer emails badly on your behalf." The night he left, the spare choir attempted harmonies and cracked into giggles. Noor read a poem at the mic in the fellowship hall, hands shaking, voice steadying on the third line. Eddie clapped off beat on purpose, proudly disruptive. Lena poured coffee and felt like a hinge on a good door. The next morning, ice returned like a rumor. Mr. Alvarez called because the porch step groaned and he did not trust it. Lena and Jay walked over with a level and a patience bought on discount and earned by practice. "It's holding," Jay said, kneeling to listen with his hands. "It just wants you to know it's winter." Lena laughed. They salted the walk and left a note on the rail anyway. "This step is with you. Your porch friends." At the hospital, a man with a stack of debt notices came to the desk and spread them like losing cards. His shoulders sagged under math no one should carry alone. "I need a miracle," he said, half mocking. "I can't conjure money," Lena said. "I can sit on hold and file appeals and make someone listen to your story." He looked at her as if he'd been offered permission to breathe. They made a folder and a plan. When he left, she wrote his name on a sticky note and stuck it to the corner of her monitor where she kept Mercy's in queue. On a Friday, Lena and her mother sat at the small table with the window steamed and the stew forgiving itself for the third week in a row. "You get this from your grandmother," her mother said, spoon in the air. "She forgave meals like other people forgave people." She paused, eyes shining with something other than steam. "I was not a good friend to you when you were little," she said, abrupt and true. "I was tired and worried, and I thought keeping the lights on was the same as being a mother." "You kept the lights on," Lena said, not as excuse, but as honor. "And we can be friends now." They didn't name all the losses. They named the next Thursday. Near the end of the month, Pastor Daniel returned, eyes older in a way that didn't make him less himself. He stood at the pulpit like a man who has sat on a long bus and remembered how to stand. "Brothers and sisters," he said, voice a notch lower. John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. My father fell asleep in Christ last night." The room caught its breath. He loved bad jokes and good pancakes. He taught me to say please and to replace the rake where it belongs. He told me I was loved. And the Lord tells me my father is not lost. He is found ahead of me. If you need that peace today, I'm not preaching it at you. I am begging for it with you. After the benediction, the church did what churches learned slowly, or not at all. They did not try to fix him. They fed him. Jay pushed a plate into his hands. Ruth took his coat and bossed him into a chair. Theo played something with too many minors, and it worked. Noor set down a poem near his elbow, like a note for later. Eddie produced socks with crowns, because he had learned to let a joke be a blessing. Lena walked home that night with her friend. Snow fell in the kind of flakes that look like drafts of a letter God keeps rewriting until it's beautiful. "I used to think friendship was mostly about talking without running out," her friend said. "Now I think it's about standing in the doorway with someone until they decide the room is safe." Lena nodded, watching the way their footprints made a sentence down Mercy Street. She thought of the first evening she had slipped into the sanctuary hoping to be invisible. She thought of the spare chair that had been an altar and a bench and a joke and a lifeline. She thought of the creek of grief and the river of baptism and the ocean of small tasks that had turned into a map of belonging. At her building, the foyer smelled like wet coats and old mail. She opened the box and found a postcard without a return address. On the front, a photograph of a wooden chair by a window. On the back, in uneven print, "Thank you for the seat. No crowns today. Just stripes. E." She smiled and taped it to the inside of her door, at eye level, where she would see it when leaving and when coming home. Sunday to Sunday, The weeks kept doing their long work. Lena answered 3 rooftop invitations with a clean no and one with a yes that felt honest. She sat on porches made of wood and of conversation. She counted names like beads, not to keep, but to pray. When loneliness came, and it still did, a thin visitor with cold fingers, she let it in and handed it a bowl. It didn't stay as long now. It learned the door. On a night when the sky was clear enough to hear, she stood on the church steps while the city practiced being quiet. She touched the groove worn by 1,000 hands and said, almost aloud, "I am not left out. I am brought in." And the door, old and faithful, seemed to agree. February arrived with a thaw that wasn't convinced of itself. Sidewalks sweated and then remembered to freeze. The spare chair sign kept its sprig of pine, now brittle and brave. On a Tuesday morning, a burst pipe made its own sermon. Lena turned the corner into the fellowship hall and stopped. Water slid down the far wall in thin, humiliating sheets. A ceiling tile gave up and sagged into the shape of a tired hammock. Jay stood with a mop like a man proposing to a flood. "Reasonable river," he announced, already ankle-deep. Eddie skidded in, wearing his warehouse jacket, hair sticking up in astonishment. "Royal issue buckets," he declared, grabbing 2 and setting a rhythm. Ruth, healed enough to scold, pointed with her cane. "Roll the piano, towels to the pews. Theo, keys up to the stage. Gently, like they're a sleeping baby who will become Mozart if you don't drop him." Noor sprinted for the supply closet, came back with a box of shop towels, and slipped only once, catching themselves with the grace of someone who has learned to fall and consider it practice. Lena hauled tables to dry ground, hands cold and sure. The spare chair soaked through and looked ridiculous with a towel turban. She lifted it, wrung its cushion with Mira at the sink, and laughed. A wild, relieved sound. Because there is something funny about drying furniture that has saved your life. Pastor Daniel arrived with a wrench and a prayer. A plumber followed with the reverse. The main valve surrendered. The water slowed, sulked, stopped. They stood for a moment in the wreckage. Damp paper signs, a swampy rug, the sermon notes of a building that had been interrupted. Pastor Daniel set his palm on the wall as if offering terms. "Brothers and sisters," he said softly. Luke, chapter 6, verse 48. "When a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. We'll dry. We'll sing upstairs. We'll call this an extended baptism." By evening, the sanctuary smelled faintly of wet carpet and stubborn hope. The spare chair, newly blow-dried, sat at the end of a front pew with a fresh paper taped to its back. Someone had written in purple ink, "Still here." The room filled with the shuffle of people who had spent the day mopping and the evening deciding to be together anyway. Theo played something slow, the notes spaced so the building could breathe between them. After the closing prayer, Lena and her friend walked the perimeter, touching wood that had held. "That chair has better comedic timing than I do," her friend said, tapping its arm. "You leave room for the punchline," Lena said. "That's a different skill." A week later, the church held a small memorial for Pastor Daniel's father. No fanfare, just a photo on a table, a plate of pancakes in the fellowship hall. The griddle had survived, and a congregation that knew how to sit near sorrow without narrating it. In the pulpit, Pastor Daniel looked like himself and like a son. He took a breath that the room took with him. "Brothers and sisters," he said. John, chapter 11, verse 25. "I am the resurrection and the life. I am not preaching this at you. I am leaning on it with you." He told a story about a rake in the wrong place and a please that had sounded like the gospel. He did not rush the ending. They sang nothing loud. Eddie put a pair of striped socks under the photo and no one pretended not to see. At the hospital, the winter's third wave of respiratory misery filled every seat. Lena moved through it like a person carrying a lantern in a crowded hallway. An older man cursed at the ceiling until the room learned his dead wife's name. Lena stood at the edge of his island and said it with him. "I'm not a priest," he muttered, ashamed of his own noise. "You're allowed to be human," she said. "We have forms for everything except that, and it's the only thing we excel at." On a Friday that believed in sunlight, Lena found Mr. Alvarez already on his porch, a radio whispering old boleros at knee height. The rail felt warm under her palm. "She would have liked the way it leans," he said, smiling at the memory of a woman who could not be parted from a chair with a view. "It leans toward the street. It means to listen." Back at the church, Nor pinned a report card to the bulletin next to spare chair, halfway embarrassed, wholly proud. "You don't have to post your grades," Mira said, eyes bright. "I wanted to ring the bell," Nor answered. "It's loud on days I think I invented failing." Ruth clapped as if called to it. Theo gave Nor a ridiculous bow that made everyone snort. The rooftop circle sent another invitation. Morrow's, open mic, an anniversary of some night that had once mattered more. Lena typed, "I hope your stories land," and then put her phone down like a cup she didn't need to sip. She and her friend spent that evening on Mercy Street instead, elbows on a card table in the fellowship hall, addressing envelopes for Porch Project Ramp Day. They argued amiably about commas. They let the room fill in their silence. Later, while emptying the trash, Lena met the teenager who had hovered at the back for weeks, hood up, attention down. A flicker of a face, the glance of someone deciding whether to ask or bolt. Lena nodded like she did at Kat's. "There's Stu left," she said, then left the door open and walked away. 5 minutes later, the scrape of a chair. A bowl lifted without instructions. Spoon against ceramic, quick at first, then slow. Nor sidled over and said something low that made the hoodie tilt, then lower. The room ran its quiet machinery. Jay washing pans with the scrubbing intensity of a confession. Ruth labeling plastic containers for whoever would need them more tomorrow. Theo trying a new chord, as if it might show him a different way to pray. Mid-month, the plumber delivered his invoice with a wink and an offer to teach Jay how to winterize things that believe too easily in spring. On Sunday, Pastor Daniel held up the bill like scripture. "If anyone here is in charge of the weather," he said, "please meet me after service." Laughter, then relief. He added, Matthew, chapter 6, verse 33. "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." The things today include dry floors and enough to pay for them. If you don't have money, give a song. If you don't have a song, give a name. If you don't have a name, take one from Ruth at the door, and we'll make it yours. Lena's mother kept coming on Thursdays with a new habit of staying to wipe the table twice and tell a second story. One night, she folded her napkin into a ship and pushed it back and forth between their hands like a joke. "I'm sorry I made loneliness a lineage," she said without warning. "We're breaking it," Lena said. "You brought biscuits. I brought stew. We brought ourselves." The following week, during spare choir, Theo attempted a gospel run and derailed entirely, laughing so hard he had to sit. "Emergency rewrite," he announced. "We'll sing it straight and live to riff another day." After practice, Pastor Daniel walked out with Lena to the steps, where the night had put on its tin crisp coat. He hesitated, then offered a confession the way one might offer a tired arm. "I used to be afraid," he said, "that if people became friends with each other, they'd need me less. Then my dad got sick, and I learned how much I needed a church that didn't wait for my permission to love." "You built a porch that doesn't collapse when you leave it," Lena said. "That's harder than preaching well." He chuckled. Matthew. Chapter 23 warns me not to like the best seats. I prefer the mid-pew with a spare chair. Snow came back for a weekend to remind the block who ran the calendar. On Saturday, ramp day, the team met outside Ms. Valdez's house and stared at the frozen ground like a puzzle with teeth. Jay clapped his gloved hands. "We build, we thaw, we build again." They did. Breath ghosting. Laughter loud to hide the sound of numb fingers. Ms. Valdez watched from the window with a cat that insisted it would mark every new board at the first opportunity. "We accept baptisms," Jay said. "We do not accept claws." At noon, Lena's phone vibrated. A message from the rooftop storyteller. "I came by Mercy Street last Sunday. Sat in the back. Didn't say hi. The quiet felt like a good kind of loud. If you're there tomorrow, I'll brave the front door." She looked at the ramp, at the way the last plank had finally met the landing, at Noor handing screws like communion, at Eddie doing a little dance to get warmth back into his toes. She typed, "The front door remembers names. I'll be there. Spare chair, too." On Sunday, the sanctuary hummed at a pitch only communities learn. Ruth stood at the door with name tags and a twinkle that belonged to children and generals. Lena's rooftop friend came in with a scarf that made bravery look like an outfit. She hovered. Ruth pointed at the front pew. "That chair waits for you," she said, as if it were fact, not invitation. The service moved like a river, remembering its bends. Pastor Daniel lifted his voice. "Brothers and sisters," Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. We are not a hill, and our hill is not that high. And yet, keep your lights on. Someone is walking toward you." After the benediction, the friend exhaled a laugh. "The room did not eat me," she said to Lena. "It fed me." "It's rude like that," Lena said. They sat together for a minute in the front pew, elbow to elbow, letting the noise of people stack around them like shelter. The spare chair sign, still crinkled at one corner, seemed to smile in paper. Later, walking home, Lena paused at her building's door and touched the postcard from Eddie. "Thank you for the seat," now surrounded by other small proofs. The program with the son's name, a tutoring flyer with Noor's scribble, a crooked Polaroid from ramp day where Jay looked ridiculous and happy. She didn't curate them. She let them be a museum of ongoing. Upstairs, she set water to boil and stood at the window while February decided whether to be kind. The city wore its honest face. Sirens in the middle distance, a laugh from a stoop, a dog insisting at a hydrant, a bus sighing into a stop like a tired giant. She prayed the way she had learned to, short and true. "Thank you for not leaving me. Thank you for teaching me doors. Make me steady. Make me warm." Down the block, the church's front light flicked on, though the sun had another 10 minutes to give. It looked like a friend coming early on purpose. By the end of February, the thaw had grown a backbone. Gutters learned to speak again. Mercy Street smelled faintly of wet iron and soap. The church's front lights still came on a little early, the way friends do. At the hospital, Lena spent a morning triaging paperwork while the waiting room rehearsed its usual arguments. A woman in a red coat whispered angrily into a phone. A man paced and counted his steps like prayer beads. A pair of sisters took turns being brave. Security waved her over when two families began to quarrel about who deserved the next appointment more, voices rising with the temperature of fear. Lena stood between them with a clipboard and the memory of a chair that waited. "I can't move you ahead of each other," she said, calm as a held breath. "But I can make another row. 2 seats, side by side. We'll call both names, and we'll walk together to the desk when it's time." It was nothing like policy and everything like mercy. The air cooled by a degree. One sister exhaled. The red coat woman pinched her eyes and nodded. Sometimes peace looked like finding 2 chairs when the room had decided there was only one. That night, just as she hung her coat, her phone buzzed in the urgent staccato of a message thread that didn't use exclamation points unless the house was on fire. Noor. "Can I come sit in the church for a bit? Uncle mad about grades in church. I won't break anything." Ruth. "I'm 5 minutes away." Theo. "Lights on." Jay. "Stew in 10. Pastor Daniel. "Front steps." 4 o'clock rules apply to midnight too. Lena pulled her coat back on and went out into a street that had decided not to snow after all. Noor sat hunched on the rails, hood up, backpack at their feet, face pale with swallowed words. Ruth stood a step below like a sentry with a canvas tote that clinked faintly. Mugs, Lena suspected. Pastor Daniel leaned against the post with a weariness that had learned to share the load. "I don't want to be a problem," Noor said, voice too loud for the hour in the sentence. "You're not a problem," Ruth said. "You're a person. Problems don't get hot chocolate." Inside, the sanctuary held the kind of quiet that keeps its hand on your shoulder. They sat in the front pew, because the back pew can teach hiding if you let it. Jay ambled in with a thermos and the smell of cinnamon. Theo arrived with a blanket the size of a promise. Noor stared at the aisle for a long time, then at their hands. "He says church people only love until it costs them something," Noor said at last. "He says I'm embarrassing the family." Pastor Daniel rubbed his eyes and found his voice. "Brothers and sisters," he said to the tiny congregation that the hour had assembled. Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Peace is not the same as pretending. We can try for peace with your uncle without pretending you are less than a person. Noor's shoulders trembled. "I don't want to go back tonight." "You won't," Ruth said, as if announcing the weather. "You'll stay with me. I have a couch that thinks it's a guest room." "I can call a youth advocate in the morning," Pastor Daniel added. "We'll talk about school and safety and what choices are actually yours." Noor nodded once, a hinge oiled. They sipped hot chocolate as if it was an oath. Lena walked them and Ruth to the corner afterward. Ruth looped her arm through Noor's elbows with the efficiency of a woman who has shepherded more than groceries across streets. "You don't have to talk at my place," she said. "You can just listen to my old kettle judge everyone." The next afternoon, Lena's mother called while she was on lunch. Voice soft with a hesitation that used to sound like distance and now sounded like care. "This Noor," she said awkwardly, mispronouncing it the first time and fixing it the second. "They can come to dinner Thursday if that helps. Stew forgives itself in larger batches." Lena smiled into the receiver. "That helps." Noor came to Thursday like someone testing the temperature of a pool with their toes. They ate and learned the geography of Lena's mother's kitchen. How the drawer with the spoons sticks unless you whisper to it. How the stove takes a breath before it lights. How the window fogs at exactly the right moment in the story. When Noor left, they took a container of leftovers and the kind of blessing that doesn't need words. 2 days later, the uncle came to Mercy Street with a storm already running in his chest. He stood on the church steps and asked for the pastor with a volume that wanted to be a verdict. Pastor Daniel met him there, coat still on, voice even. Lena stayed inside, just beyond the vestibule, where the stained glass broke the scene into patient colors. "My child disrespects me," the uncle said. "This place encourages it." "This place encourages truth," Pastor Daniel answered, not moving closer or farther. "And safety. We want peace if we can have it. We won't send a child into harm to achieve it." "Church is a sickness," the uncle snapped. "Fills their head with other people's business." "Sometimes church is a hospital," Pastor Daniel said. "Sometimes it is a carpenter's shop. Tonight it is a porch. Would you like to sit and talk like neighbors?" The uncle's jaw worked. "You think you're the father in your book," he said bitterly. "I'm the father. You don't tell me my house." "I won't," Pastor Daniel said. "But Jesus will tell both of us our hearts." He took a breath that winter stole half of. John, chapter 14, verse 18. "I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you." Your child is not an orphan. Neither are you. If you want a way forward, we'll walk it. If you want to shout, we can stand here until you finish. It wasn't eloquence that turned the air. It was the refusal to make the moment smaller or bigger than it was. The uncle's shoulders sagged a fraction. "They can come home," he said finally. "If they stop this church every day, if they stop talking back, if—" "No conditions tonight," Pastor Daniel said gently. "We can meet tomorrow with a third person who knows the law and the love. Tonight, your child is safe and fed. Tomorrow, we try for peace with a table and a witness. Noon." The uncle glared at the bricks, at the banner, at the pastor's calm. "Noon," he said, as if the word tasted like metal. He left with anger still living in his elbows, but something else had moved out. The meeting happened at a long table in the basement that still remembered the flood. A youth advocate sat with a clipboard and a competence that did not need to perform. Noor spoke without shouting. The uncle defended without destroying. Boundaries were drawn with a pen and a phone number. Choices were named that belonged to Noor, and responsibilities named that did not. It was not reconciliation. It was a map. Afterward, Noor stood at the spare chair and rested their forehead against the paper sign as if it were cool tile. "I thought I had to pick one family and lose the other," they said to Lena. "You don't," she answered. "And on the days you feel like you did, we'll say it again." March arrived wearing rain like a cardigan. The ramp at Ms. Valdez's glistened and held. Mr. Alvarez's porch hosted the first argument of spring about baseball that anyone could remember. Eddie learned to love how morning smells when you come off a night shift. Burnt toast somewhere, bus exhaust, the sweet, unfair scent of bakery doors opening. At the hospital, the man with the stack of debt notices returned with a thinner stack and a grin that looked dangerous in the best way. "2 appeals approved," he said, slapping the counter gently as if not to wake the gods. "You were right about telling the story until someone heard it." "You told it," Lena said. "I just stayed on the line." On a Wednesday, the fellowship hall hosted a new table. Spare desk. Tutoring and forms, job applications and housing lists. Pens that finally wrote. Mira ran it with the cheer of a crossing guard and the precision of a librarian. Noor sat behind it sometimes, handing out clipboards and courage. Spare choir learned a hymn in a minor key and sang it like a river under ice. Theo messed up and shrugged, and everyone loved him more for it. Pastor Daniel preached a sermon that felt like someone reading a letter they had not written, but had found tucked under a pillow. "Brothers and sisters," he said. Mark, chapter 2. Roof breakers, Friends who carry corners. Find a corner today. That afternoon, Lena's mother sent a text that made her laugh out loud at the hospital desk. I put my name on spare place. Don't worry, I won't oversalt people. She sent back 3 hearts and a recipe correction that would save the biscuits from their own ambition. One evening, as the light stayed a little longer just to show off, Lena and her friend sat on the church steps with cups that had forgotten to be hot. Across the street, a boy practiced skateboard tricks, landing 1 out of 5 with the kind of joy that makes failure look like a rehearsal for flight. I used to think left out was a verdict, her friend said, watching him. Now it's a direction. It just means I need to step in somewhere else. Lena nodded. Doors, she said. We learned doors. Down the block, the front light flicked on a few minutes before anyone needed it. The church stood like a sentence that has learned where to pause and where to keep going. Inside, the spare chair waited with its ridiculous turban story and its new ink. Still here, someone had added, and below it, in smaller letters, still yours. Lena touched the railing where hands had taught wood to remember and thought, not as triumph, but as truth, of the first night she'd sat in the back with her headphones in and her hope off. She did not rehearse the speech she would give to some future loneliness. She trusted the door. She trusted the friend. She stood, and the step was with her. Spring took the city by the shoulders and shook the salt out of it. Buds showed up like shy punctuation along Mercy Street. The ramp at Ms. Valdez's wore a stripe of mud from neighborhood kids who had decided it was a launch pad. Mr. Alvarez moved his radio outdoors for the season and let Boleros spill into the new air. At the hospital, the waiting room softened by degrees, trading coughs for bruises and the particular relief of no longer seeing steam when you talk. A woman brought her newborn for a check and cried from the fatigue of doing everything right. Lena fetched a chair, then a second for the grandmother who had come along with stories and criticism in equal measure. 2 chairs, Lena said, setting them side by side. That's our specialty. On Mercy Street, spare desk became a thing people said as if it had always been there. Noor's handwriting appeared on the sign-up board sometimes, blocky letters bending toward neatness. They had moved back home, with boundaries that squeaked like new hinges, and kept a backpack at Ruth's place, just in case the weather inside changes. One Saturday in late March, the church hosted a fix-it day that began with optimism and ended with paint in everyone's hair. Jay taught a workshop called Caulk Without Swearing. Mira labeled jars of screws like a botanist. Eddie stood by the tool table with a clipboard and a gravity that made people obey safety rules for the first time in recorded history. Royal issue goggles, he said, and handed them out as if they conferred rank. Lena and her friend sanded a door until its old paint turned to fog. I used to think doors were just there, her friend said, wrist aching, smile honest. Now I know they're maintained. They also remember, Lena said, palming the smooth panel. Like this one. Holy Week arrived with rain that refused drama and settled for persistence. On Thursday night, Pastor Daniel set basins at the chancel and asked, not demanded, if you want your feet washed, come. If you want to wash a foot, come. If you want to sit and watch love be awkward and beautiful, come. Lena's mother surprised herself by slipping off her shoes and laughing at the tickle of the towel. Noor stood nearby with a basin like an offering and found that the act calmed the noise in their head. Eddie refused at first on principle and then relented, muttering about a warehouse man's dignity until the warm water made him quiet. Good Friday. The sanctuary went simple. No flowers, no unnecessary words. Pastor Daniel read the Passion slowly enough for the room to stay with it. When he reached the cry, he let it hang like a bell no one wanted to strike. Matthew, Chapter 27, verse 46. My God, why have you forsaken me? People held their breath and did not rush to Easter. Lena sat between her mother and her friend and felt how the silence made room for the questions she still had. On Saturday, the air was stubbornly ordinary, as if the city had not been told about the liturgical calendar. The spare chair sat in the front pew with a fresh paper. Still here, still yours. And someone had sketched a little crown above the S because jokes insisted on hope. Easter morning broke like a good secret. Sun on the river without performance. Children pelting down the aisle with lilies that tipped dangerously. Theo played triumphant and almost kept up. Pastor Daniel's voice found its strength on the second sentence. Brothers and sisters, he said, John, chapter 20, verse 16. Jesus said to her, Mary. He knows names. He knows yours. He knows the ones you only whisper. He did not thunder. He named. It was enough. During the last hymn, a neighbor Lena had seen only on porches slid into the spare chair and cried quietly with relief. After service, on the steps, Noor showed Lena a text from their uncle. Proud of you. It was typed like a man afraid to overcommit and brave enough to try. Noor blinked at the screen as if the letters might jump. I didn't think the sentence existed, they said. Some words are built like bells, Lena answered. They take a while to ring. That afternoon, the rooftop storyteller walked with Lena and her friend to the riverbend. I told a story last week, she said, skipping a stone that sank anyway. About a traffic cone and a bad night and a door that wouldn't open. She looked at Mercy Street across the water. I think I'm ready to tell the better version, the one where the door wasn't the only door. Come tell it at spare choir, Theo yelled from a distance, making them all laugh. We accept testimonies in G major. April folded into a kindness of longer evenings. The porch project list got shorter, and then immediately longer, because houses and hearts conspire that way. Lena's Thursdays with her mother grew a ritual. A walk after dishes, arm in arm, pointing out window boxes and dogs and arguments they didn't need to win. Her mother began to bring a new casserole that did not pretend to be plain. It had learned modesty without lying. At the hospital, the man with the appeals stopped by to hand Lena a thank you card with a scratch-off lottery ticket inside for comedy. She scratched it later and won $5, which she turned into oranges for tables for strangers, because blessings like to be converted into fruit. Mid-month, a boy from the neighborhood tagged the church wall with a sloppy heart and a crown. Jay found it at dawn and groaned, already reaching for solvent. Pastor Daniel looked at it for a long minute and said, "Leave it a week." People frowned, then began to smile when the boy came by, eyes wide at being seen. "You want to paint something better?" Jay asked, handing him a roller. By Saturday, a small mural replaced the scrawl. Hands passing a cup, a chair by a window, a ramp in blue, a river line curving toward a sun. The crown stayed, small in the corner, like a joke no one wanted to erase. Lena got a voicemail from the father she'd met in the chapel. "I planted tomatoes," he said, voice steadier. "If they live, I'll bring a basket to the church. If they don't, well, it was good to put my hands in something that didn't need me to be brave." She saved the message, then saved the number as tomatoes, which felt accurate. On a Tuesday, that thought about rain and changed its mind. Lena found the sanctuary empty and sat in the front pew without crisis. She did not ask for anything profound. She let gratitude inventory her life. She whispered names like a liturgy. Ruth, Jay, Mira, Theo, Eddie, Noor, Pastor Daniel, her mother, the rooftop friend, Mr. Alvarez, Ms. Valdez, tomatoes. She spoke her own name last and did not flinch. "Practicing?" Pastor Daniel asked from the aisle, the kind of startle that means you are safe. "Remembering," she said. He nodded toward the spare chair. "We're thinking about retiring the paper and carving it into the wood," he said. Names change. Needs change. Chairs should keep their job descriptions. "Keep the paper," Lena said, smiling. "It lets people add crowns." He laughed, then sobered, hand on the pew back like a man steadying himself for a good thing. "Baptism's in May," he said. "River willing. Anyone you want to invite?" "I'll ask," she said. "No pressure. Just a place." May began flirting with summer, throwing heat at sidewalks and inviting excuses. On the baptism day, the congregation gathered again at the bend, where Theo had disappeared and risen and shouted with a towel in his teeth. The water was cold enough to make decisions. Noor stood by Ruth with a towel bigger than they were, watching a woman step in who had sat in the back for months, watching a kid who had learned the minor hymn sing a major one. Lena's mother stood with her hands in her pockets and an expression that looked, to anyone who knew her, like a yes making its way to the lips. The rooftop storyteller, scarfless now, sleeves rolled, stood beside Lena and said, almost conversational, "I think I'm ready for the kind of story you praise with water." Lena turned, caught her eyes. "We have towels," she said, simple as an invitation to breakfast. Pastor Daniel, pant legs already dark, lifted his voice just enough. "Brothers and sisters," he called over the hush in the river. "Romans says we are buried with him and raised. There is room for more." The scarfless friend stepped forward without drama, as if walking into a sentence that had always been waiting. Afterward, they sprawled on blankets and ate cupcakes again, because theology is easier with sugar. Eddie passed out oranges like a man addicted to a bit. Noor taught a small child to skip stones, and did not mind when neither stone nor child obeyed. Lena lay back and watched a hawk write its own calligraphy across a sky that had stopped pretending to be winter. On the walk back, the spare chair sign had acquired another line. Someone's neat hand writing what the paper had learned to mean. Sit. Stay. Be known. Lena laughed, then touched the tape to make sure it held. That evening, in the soft collapse after joy, she went to the hospital chapel because habit had become love. The stained glass warmed in the late light. She sat 2 pews back and said thank you a dozen ways. When she rose, a woman slipped in and hesitated like someone apologizing to furniture. "Is it okay to just sit?" the woman asked. "It's what it was made for," Lena said, and stepped aside. On Mercy Street, kids ran the ramp like a parade route. Mr. Alvarez's porch hosted a chess game that had lasted 4 days and 2 pans of rice. The mural's small crown collected fingerprints from children tracing the edges. The front light of the church flicked on a few minutes early, keeping a promise no one had made it swear to. Lena put her hand on the railing where the wood knew her and thought, not grandly, but with gratitude that made the air bigger. I am not left out. I am brought in. She went inside to stack chairs and label containers and learn a new name that would be a bell the next time they said it. June unfolded like a clean shirt on a clothesline, warm and smelling of soap. Mercy Street traded jackets for sunburns and learned the small swagger of not checking the sky every hour. The mural brightened under longer days. Kids traced the tiny crown with sticky fingers and left their laughter on the wall as if it were a signature. At the hospital, Lena met a man whose English came out in careful shards. He placed a stack of forms on the counter and a hand over his heart. "I know work," he said. "I don't know this paper." She pulled the spare desk binder from her bag and slid it between them like a bridge. "We can know it together," she said. And they did. Box by stubborn box. Signature by tremulous signature. He left with copies and a plan and an address for tables for strangers. "Breakfast?" he said, testing the word. "Yes," she answered, as if blessing something old as shorelines. On Mercy Street, Pastor Daniel set a shade canopy over the front steps, because light tells the truth and also tires people out. "Brothers and sisters," he said one Sunday, voice resting rather than pushing. Mark chapter 10, verse 45. "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." If the king stoops, we can stoop without losing our crowns. He didn't mention the blisters or the plumbing bill. He didn't need to. Jay's bandaged finger and the spare chair's towel turban legend told that gospel just fine. Eddie marked 90 days of showing up for nights with a grin and a sheet cake that said in shaky frosting, "You did it, Guy." No one knew exactly who had written Guy instead of Eddie, but the joke stuck like a liturgy. He stood in the fellowship hall with a plastic fork and the confidence of a man who now had 2 keys and an alarm that woke him without malice. "Royal issue," he said, lifting a sliver of cake as though toasting the fluorescent lights. "Exclusive to stubborn humans." Noor's grades rose like green shoots no one had believed would survive the last frost. They brought the report to the spare desk and pretended indifference while their eyes made promises to the future. Their uncle came one Wednesday and stood awkwardly at the doorway until Ruth bodily steered him toward the coffee. He nodded at the room, at Noor, at the sign that said, "Still here, still yours," as if conceding that some furniture is smarter than arguments. He left with a container of stew and the phone number of the youth advocate saved under annoyingly wise. Lena visited the father she called Tomatoes. He met her at his building stoop with a grocery bag that sagged in the middle the way good produce does. "They made it," he said, surprised by his own success. "I didn't cry while planting them this time. I cried while watering, which seems more useful." She laughed, not at him, but with him. He waited on the church steps with the bag like a triumphant secret until somebody told him to stop waiting and start handing them out. He did, solemn as a priest. Her mother began to come early on Thursdays and leave late, the evening shrinking around stories they hadn't told yet. She mentioned the river as if it were a friend and looked at the mural longer than necessary. One night, she took Lena's hand in a gesture that belonged to both past and present and said, "When you were little, I made you into my task list. I am sorry." Lena didn't swat the apology away like a fly. She set it down and looked at it with her mother. "We're different now," she said, "and the kitchen is kind to us." The rooftop storyteller, whose name people finally learned because names refuse to remain anonymous where mercy is practiced, invented a new habit. She told true stories at spare choir and left the microphone at Morrow's to those who still needed it. She spoke about doors without sneering and about porches without pretending they finished the house. She volunteered at spare desk on Tuesdays, writing cover letters with the honesty of someone who once sold herself to strangers and now preferred to introduce instead. July came with the sound of screen doors and a heat that made the shade canopy feel like a sacrament. The porch project list sprouted fan deliveries, window units for elders, and remember water. Pastor Daniel tried to preach shorter and failed twice, then succeeded beautifully on the 3rd week with a single sentence held up like a cup. "Brothers and sisters," he said, Matthew chapter 9, verse 13. "I desire mercy and not sacrifice." He let the words sit. The room learned that letting a sentence sit is a kind of worship. On a Thursday, the fellowship hall filled with fans and people fanning themselves in the smell of summer fruit. Tomatoes set out his namesake on the table like trophies that weren't competing with anyone. Noor arrived with iced tea in a repurposed jar and shy pride that smelled like mint. Jay declared a moratorium on stew until October and unveiled a recipe he called reasonable salad, which turned out to be a generous lie about the number of olives one can reasonably use. After cleanup, Lena found her friend sitting on the front steps with the posture of someone whose day had asked too many questions. They watched the street invent evening. "I am not as brave as I tell people I am," her friend said, not looking up. "You're braver," Lena said. "How?" "You keep coming back." They sat in companionable heat until Pastor Daniel wandered out with 2 popsicles he pretended to have found. "John, chapter 14, verse 27, he said with mock gravity, is very pro-popsicle. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." Also, orange is better than grape. They laughed in the harmless argument that makes a porch feel like home. A week later, Mira taped a new card to the bulletin beside spare desk. "Resume hour. Bring your history. We'll build your future." The man who had said, "I know work," returned with a smile that admitted fear and a folder that admitted hope. "You say much," he told Lena, pointing to the lines they'd written together. "But not lie." She nodded. "We tell the truth generously," she said. "It's a house that fits." Mid-July, Mercy Street held a block party that started polite and ended loud in the correct way. Mr. Alvarez taught a 12-year-old to dance and was applauded like a celebrity. Ms. Valdez's cat refused the invitation and judged from a window. Theo found a groove with a summer hymn that wasn't in any hymnal. Eddie manned a grill with the precision of a warehouse shift and the flair of a man who had learned to love tongs. Ruth sat under the shade with a bowl of cherries and a smile that forgave the heat. As dusk rolled down the block, Pastor Daniel climbed 2 steps and lifted his hands. Not as a spell, but as a way of gathering a room. "Brothers and sisters," he said. Luke, chapter 14, verse 12. When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors. Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. We invited everyone with elbows. If you came hungry, we're glad you're here. If you came lonely, take home a name. He didn't say amen. He handed the tongs to Eddie. Later, when the street had been cleaned back into itself and the mural's crown wore barbecue smoke like a halo, Lena walked the long way home. Outside the hospital, she paused by the chapel door and looked in at the colored squares on the floor. A woman sat inside, hands twisting a program into a ribbon. Lena didn't enter. She let the chapel do its job. At her building, she touched the postcard that said, "Thank you for the seat and the crooked Polaroid from Ramp Day, and the note from Tomatoes about plants that live without applause." August pressed heat into corners and asked the church whether it remembered winter's vows. It did, with fans and ice towels and a rotating ministry of checking on elders. The spare chair acquired a paper fan tied to its arm with blue painter's tape. Someone had written, in Noor's block letters, "For when courage sweats." One night, the power flickered and held. People cheered anyway, as if practice mattered. A teenager new to the block hovered in the doorway as if asking permission to change his mind about people. Lena waved him toward the fan and didn't interrogate his story. "2 chairs," she said, sliding one over. He sat, suspicious and grateful, and let his shoulders drop exactly half an inch. Near month's end, Pastor Daniel announced he'd be gone for a week. His father's house to settle, a mother to sit with while choosing which tools to keep and which to give to men who forget to return them. "I'll be back," he said, and the room didn't doubt it. He looked at Lena after service and said, "You good to hold porch night with Jay?" She nodded before fear could invent reasons. "Bring the sentence that helps you pray," he added. We'll pray those. On porch night, they set out iced tea and index cards. People wrote down their sentences. Help. Thank you. I'm tired. Stay. Sorry. More. Enough. Lena read one aloud. Keep me kind when I'm not noticed. The porch hummed with honest weather. She felt the wobble of old loneliness like a ghost at the edge of a photograph and did not flinch. Matthew, chapter 5, she said quietly, to no one and to herself. A city on a hill. Lights on. She exhaled. Someone else read, Teach me doors, the porch agreed. The weak Pastor Daniel returned, clouds stacked like spare chairs at the horizon, and then remembered the script. Rain came, hard at first, then skilled. The canopy breathed and did not break. Afterward, the air tasted like metal and forgiveness. Lena stood at the edge of the church lawn and held out her hands to feel the last drops. Her friend joined her and did the same. They looked at each other and laughed at the simple fact that they were there, in weather and in quiet, inside a story that had stopped auditioning for other rooms. On Sunday, Pastor Daniel closed his Bible slowly, as if it had said the thing he needed without being asked to shout. Brothers and sisters, he said. Luke chapter 24, verse 32. Did not our hearts burn within us while he opened to us the scriptures? Mine did this week, in a garage full of wrenches and old cards. Thank you for keeping the lights on. He glanced toward the spare chair and the mural and the ramp that invited even stubborn cats to try mercy. If you are left out, he said, voice going softer, you have walked into the wrong story. Come in. Sit. Stay. Be known. Lena felt the words settle like rain on fields that had been waiting all their life. She looked around at the faces that had become sentences, and the sentences that had become chairs, and the chairs that had learned to be more than furniture. She thought again, not dramatically, but faithfully. I am not left out. I am brought in. And when the benediction came, she didn't rush to the door. She stayed in the middle of the aisle, and people had to navigate around her, and this felt exactly right. September approached on tiptoes, softening the heat with evenings that remembered wind. Mercy Street wore a thin gold at 5 o'clock. The mural's little crown kept collecting fingerprints and forgiveness. In the fellowship hall, a paper calendar showed boxes filled with small handwriting. Ramp check, resume hour, stew returns, porch night, tables for strangers, fall edition. Someone had added in purple ink, spare chair anniversary. Bring stories, not speeches. On the day, windows were propped open for the performance of early autumn air. Jay lugged in a toolbox and set it on the front pew with ceremony. By order of common sense and popular demand, he declared, tapping the pew end where the paper sign had lived through storms and laughter. We retire the paper and invite permanence. A local carpenter, friend of a friend who became a friend himself, ran his thumb over the wood and nodded. We'll carve the job description, he said. Keep a nail nearby for crowns. People filtered in with the quiet bustle that makes a room ready. Ruth wore a scarf she insisted did not mean anything, and a grin that said otherwise. Noor set the spare desk sign by the door, as if to remind opportunity where to find them. Eddie brought 2 bags of socks, one striped and one crowned, because he refused to let hope become impractical. Lena's mother placed a casserole on the table and shook out a handkerchief that belonged to another century. The rooftop storyteller, sleeves rolled, hair up, held a stack of small blank cards. Write a line, she told anyone within reach. Just one. No speeches. We'll hang them like laundry. Pastor Daniel stood near the aisle with the posture of a man trying not to make too much of it and failing in the gentlest way. Brothers and sisters, he said. when the room had found its seat and its silence. John, chapter 14, verse 18. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Stop. We started this year with a sentence. Tonight we carve one into wood. He gestured toward the pew. Chairs are for sitting and saving and saying you belong. This one's for all three. The carpenter set the chisel and began. The sound small and certain. Tap and pause. Tap and lift. Letters emerged like stones from a river. Spare chair. Still here. Still yours. He leaned back, wiped dust, set the chisel again. Beneath the line, he carved 2 little brackets of empty space. A permanent invitation for crowns and jokes and whatever else Mercy wanted to pin there. While the work went on, the room did what rooms do when love has learned to schedule itself. Theo played a progression that had become the church's unlisted anthem. Nor moved between tables like a careful tide. Jay stirred stew with the flourish of a man returning to his season. Ruth collected the one-line cards on a string. Keep me kind when I am overlooked. Show me the door. 2 chairs. Every time. Make me the friend I needed. Eddie taped his own. Royal issue grace. Lena stood beside her friend at the end of the pew, shoulder to shoulder. How they always stood when something felt like a chapter break. She thought of the first night she had hovered by the back door, headphones in, heart off. She thought of the storm and the flood and the socks with crowns. She thought of Tomatoes, who stood now near the coffee urn, grinning at anyone who lifted his produce as if they'd discovered flavor for the first time. She thought of Noor's sentence, proud of you, arriving on a screen like a bell that knew its work. Gratitude made her throat tight in a way that didn't ask for spectacle. The carving finished with a little flourish that looked like a smile. The carpenter brushed the letters clean with his palm. There, he said softly, as if he'd introduced 2 old friends. People came forward to touch the words, fingertips tracing the groove of still here like a prayer. Ruth reached for a hammer, placed a tiny brass nail beneath the last S, and hung a paper crown cut from a grocery bag. Testify without speeches, Pastor Daniel said, lifting the string of one-line cards like a laundry day. He read them in no particular order, voice steady. I found the front door. The chair saved me a night. I learned to ask. We washed feet, and the water was warm. The wall has a crown now. I am not left out. He paused, smiled, glanced at the faces that had taught him these lines. Amen, he said, and the room answered in various pronouns. Near the door, a girl stood with her hand on the jamb the way a person might touch water before deciding to swim. She wore a jacket too big, and a look that made Lena's heart remember its first vocabulary. The girl's eyes darted from the mural to the pew to the string of cards, suspicious of kindness that arrived on time. Lena moved without announcing it. She walked to the girl as if walking toward a stove that needed tending. I'm Lena, she said. You look like you could use a seat. The girl lifted one shoulder. I was just looking. Good chairs are best for that, Lena said. She led her toward the front, where the letters in the wood had that new carved scent of certainty. This one's job is to wait. The girl hovered, then sat with the posture of a person unsure if gravity would hold. Do I need to say anything? She asked. Not tonight, Lena said. We have stew and people who will learn your name at whatever speed lets you keep it. Across the aisle, Pastor Daniel lifted his voice, not to preach, but to set the room's next breath. Brothers and sisters, Luke, chapter 15, verses 4 through 7. He let the story walk in on its own legs. Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. We have been found 100 times this year. We will be found again. If you came carrying only your own weight, let us grab a corner. Eddie appeared with bowls as if conjured by the word, let. Jay ladled with ceremony. Noor brought the basket of cards to the new girl, who picked one and wrote carefully. I'm tired of being the last to know. Noor nodded like someone who knew that sentence by heart. We have a bulletin board for that, they said, and people who knock twice. The evening unspooled toward a gentle middle. Someone started a dishwashing line and called it the choir. The teenage skateboarder from the block hovered by the doorway until Theo dragged him in and handed him a towel. Tomatoes told a bad joke about salads and forgiveness. Ruth held court from the end of the pew and threatened to make people wear sweaters in September. Lena's mother sat with a woman her own age and learned she had the same casserole pan. They spoke of lids and loss and recipes that refused to be written down. Later, as lanterns came out for tone more than necessity, Pastor Daniel stood at the steps with his Bible under his arm like a familiar tool. The night had that early fall clarity that makes sound travel farther. He didn't raise his voice. He said it where everyone could hear it without effort. John, chapter 21, verse 12, he said, smiling. Come and have breakfast. We've had plenty of dinners. We'll keep making breakfast too. If you're left out in other rooms, let us be your other. The new girl finished her stew and glanced at the letters again. She touched the groove of yours with one fingertip, as if checking whether it would claim her back. Lena watched without hovering, the way she had learned. She looked toward the door, worn, faithful, grooved by 1,000 hands, and felt the same old line move through her like breath. I am not left out. I am brought in. On the way out, the autumn air tested everyone's sleeves. Mira fussed at the sign-up board with a marker that refused to cooperate and then coaxed it into writing anyway. Jay locked the kitchen the way a man forgives appliances. Eddie hung the striped socks where a child would find them and feel, for one ridiculous second, royal. Lena walked the last circuit with her friend, turning off lights. At the pew, she let her hand rest on the carved words and then on the little nail where a paper crown hung. We'll keep the paper, she said. Some things are supposed to be temporary, her friend answered. It leaves room for today. They stepped onto Mercy Street. The shade canopy breathed in the small evening wind. From Mr. Alvarez's porch, a radio murmured something gentle. The church's front light flicked on a few minutes early, as if refusing to learn punctuality when mercy was required. They stood there a moment. Two people who had once curated their exits and now didn't mind being seen staying. Somewhere behind them, chairs scraped, laughter folded, a broom found its pan. Ahead of them, a girl who had written, I'm tired of being the last to know, walked with Noor toward the bus stop, and Ruth called after them to mind the curb, and Pastor Daniel reached to switch off the vestibule lamp and hesitated. Let it shine a little longer. Lena took a breath and let it out as if laying something on a table that could hold it. She touched the railing where Wood remembered, then turned toward home, toward Thursday, toward the next small sentence she would serve with stew and mercy. The door swung gently behind her, grateful, she'd like to imagine, to be used again. Brothers and sisters, if you made it this far, thank you for walking with us. Would you like and subscribe so these sermons and stories can reach the lonely, the overlooked, the almost giving up? One click, one share, one more seat at the table.